Hello summoners, welcome to season 14. Tons of changes to objectives, the map, and especially items. Fortunately, nothing for champions, but Riot is gonna hotfix after probably just a few days when they see how certain win rates come to be. They actually mentioned that, if you're unsure. By the way, if you don't have enough time to watch this video, maybe just leave it on your second monitor in the background or something, and perhaps you'll find something interesting. I'm just giving you a reminder. I'll really appreciate that. Thank you guys. Anyways, we got the Void Grubs, which is a new objective that spawns in the Verdant Pit at 5 minutes at the same time as Dragon, so you'll have both of them at the same time, which adds some gameplay to League of Legends. Here you'll see some details. Essentially, 3 of them spawn at 5 minutes, and then after you kill them, they respawn after 4 minutes. So you can have up to 6 in one game. They also gain a shield if you kill one of them. So if you, let's say you kill this one down here, then the rest of them are gonna get a shield for 10 seconds, which makes them quite tanky early game, but I think you are able to time your damage correctly and let's say kill 2 or 3 at the same time if they are, let's say, 100 health, and then you throw Brand W that does more, and I think you can skip the shield that way, although I'm not 100% sure, okay? That is just something I heard on Twitter. For each Void Grub, you are gonna get a buff of true damage to turrets. So this is essentially the value of this objective. It's gonna give you true damage to turrets, so as a split pusher, or when your team is sieging and trying to close out the game, you're going to get more damage. And while this isn't super valuable, it's definitely something that can help you win the game. But you have to keep in mind that dragons are still going to be more important overall than Void Grubs, because you have to actually win team fights around objectives with the buffs from dragon to be able to hit turrets most of the time, unless you are split pushing, of course, in which you are going to get the most value. So depending on which champions are going to be in the game, for example, let's say you have Fiora top lane, you might want to play a bit more towards Void Grubs because you know that she will have more pressure in the game inside lane later on. Whereas if you have Ornn, then you probably shouldn't really care about Void Grubs, and Ornn is going to be stronger with dragons and at dragon teamfights, right? So that's something to note as a jungler or other roles as well that can influence top lane in some way. So once you hit 5 stacks of the buff, which means you kill 5 of these little monsters, the Void Grubs, then you are going to spawn a Void Might, which is one of these monsters that spawn when you're fighting a Void Grubs. You're going to spawn one as you are fighting a turret with an internal cooldown here. I think it says it's 15 seconds. So it's a little minion that is going to help you kill the tower. But at 6 stacks, the amount of Void Mites is increased to 2. So it's really important for you to at least steal 1 of these Void Grubs, ideally 2, and you deny a lot of the value that the enemy team is going to have. Because this, keep in mind, it's a team buff. Everyone on the team is going to get bonus damage to turrets, spawning Void Mites and stuff like that. So if you are doing a little bit of a base race, or if you lost a team fight, you are going to take a lot more damage to your structures, potentially lose an inhib or the game. Then at 14 minutes, the Rift Herald spawns. It doesn't spawn at 8 minutes anymore, of course. And if there are any Void Grubs in the pit, they're gonna despawn, just like Herald does when Baron spawns. That's pretty simple to understand. Plus, apparently, maybe it's gonna work with Belvet ult and stuff like that, I'm not sure. But Shogat can get a stack from one of the 3 Void Grubs, which means that he can technically get 2 stacks from Void Grubs when they respawn again. I'm not sure how many interactions like that there are, but yeah, they just gave an example with Shogat here. Here you can see they give 20 gold plus 10 gold per player, and then the Void Mites give 1 gold to the killer. And the Void Mites simply spawn, you just see a lot of them spawning as you're fighting the thingy. I think it said somewhere here. I'm not sure where, but yeah, you get the point. Now the Rift Herald, maybe you've seen it, maybe you've heard about it, it's been a while since they announced these changes. What happens is that you will have the ability to mount the Rift Herald. You just enter inside it, you become invulnerable, and you start driving it like it's a side wall. It's quite clunky and slow. You can run into turrets, you can change your direction to another lane, you can charge into champions and deal some extra damage, and overall it's going to deal extra damage to towers if you take control over the Rift Herald, because it's still going to go down the lane and deal its charge as it used to. You gotta be a bit careful, because it's gonna take some time to get used to it, otherwise you might troll yourself and run into a wall. It's gonna lose a lot of health randomly, and it also has a cooldown. It's still 100 gold to killer, 100 local gold. Pretty much unchanged here, it says, yep. Looked similar. So Rift Herald is not very different, it's just a little more spicy, a little more fun. Then we have some changes to blue and red. As you can see, they scale worse. Blue buff only gives 10 haste the entire game. And then the red buff, it caps at level 6. You don't no longer get the 5 max health regeneration out of combat at level 11, which was kind of like a free warmog at level 11. Definitely a lot of power there. But the difference is that when Baron spawns, so after 20 minutes, any blue, red or Scuttler that spawn becomes Voidborn, and blue and red buff, for example, will give the buff to the entire team. So you're gonna have 5 red buffs and 5 blue buffs on your own team if you secure it. And if you deny it from the enemy team, it's also super valuable because they're not gonna have these buffs. And imagine you walk into a dragon team fight. One team has 5 red buffs and blue buffs, the other team has no buffs. It's gonna create a bit of an imbalance. Not like these buffs are super crazy though, because they've been nerfed and blue is just 10 abilities, for example, but they're for sure gonna mean something. It's kind of like having some dragon buffs, you know, they're not too impactful, but of course red buff can be really strong in a lot of cases. Even a mana from blue buff sometimes. So one thing to note is that now you don't have to complete your jungle item in order to be able to transfer your buff. I assume it's after the first clear, or maybe the second clear of it. I'm not sure when exactly you can share it, but it says it's not tied with the jungle item. Of course, they're not going to allow you to share the buff level 1, but maybe at like 7 minutes you can share it. We'll see. And another thing to keep in mind is that you can't steal buffs after 20 minutes anymore. So if you kill someone, you're not going to get their buffs, because that would create a bit of an unbalanced situation. Everyone is going to have buffs 24/7 unless both teams ace each other, which extremely rarely happens. And Rift Scuttler also receives a change. when you kill it, it's gonna throw out a massive Scryer's Bloom effect, revealing all champions and worlds in a large surrounding area. All worlds revealed this way will be reduced to 1 HP. That is really solid. Definitely it's gonna feel more like an impactful objective, and Scuttler is still really important for objective fights. The movement speed really can win and lose a lot of team fights. It happens quite often, and a lot of the time it's gonna be imperative to actually smite the Scuttle Crab to have a lot better chances of winning the team fight, rather than saving it for the actual objective and then it not mattering anyway. Of course, it depends how important it is in the moment. Like, if it's soul spawning, then you might consider saving your smite if you don't have 2 stacks. But yeah, I like Scuttler Crab being more meaningful in mid-late game. Actually, it's more like late game-ish, but let's keep moving forward. Baron Nashor got reworked, and the TLDR is that now it has 3 modes that also change the terrain around Nashor. So you are gonna have 3 Baron Nashors: Hunting Baron, All-Seeing Baron, and Territorial Baron. Each having different abilities and different terrain around them. So here you are going to see some examples. This one has a bit of terrain, and they have like different abilities, different kind of CCs. This one has the most different terrain. This is going to be quite interesting. It creates some different opportunities for champions to teamfight at Nash. It's interesting. Yeah, they say it even here. And then we also got terrain changes. So top lane becomes a lot harder to gank. You don't really have that other angle. But the pixel brush here, well, it used to be the brush on the side of the wall, is more symmetric for both sides. So both teams can use this brush quite equally now, instead of blue side having the most value out of this brush, right? So there's one thing that you have to keep in mind. I'm not gonna bother reading everything here in this video, but you can pause or you can go on their website, no problem. Mid lane, they basically also made the mid lane quite a lot harder to gank. I'm just thinking about Rengar not being able to ever gank mid lane anymore, because a lot of mid laners still position really badly when Rengar is in the game. Even yesterday I remember my mid laner dying to a level 3 Rengar game because he walks up to the brush. Now that's just impossible. So rest in peace Rengar, for the mid lane ganks at least. That should never happen, by the way. You just have to stand in the middle of the lane if you play against Rengar. But hey, yeah, it's a lot harder to approach mid lane, and I understand that you had a lot of ganks in mid lane that seemed pretty unfair, especially if you played against Spike or whatnot and you draw mid lane. This creates interesting gameplay, but you also have a path here where you can sort of take a tower shot or 2 and you'll be fine ganking at certain points, which I think is interesting. They also moved the brush, which we'll probably see. Now in bot side, people are gonna say that bot lane is easier to gank now, which actually isn't true. It's just as easy to gank as it was before, except now it's just as easy to gank red side as it is to gank blue side. Well, for the most part, it's just more symmetrical. The problem is though that now there's this contrast that you can't really gank top lane that well, or mid lane, but you can gank bot lane more, so it might be frustrating for bot laners, which are also known crybabies, no flame of course, that they are gonna get ganked a bit more often, but it's not that huge of a difference. A lot of junglers could have bypassed the tower anyway from this angle. A lot of junglers just Rek'Sai, Hecarim takes like one tower shot. Anything with a dash, really, it's not that big of a deal. So it might be more of a mental thing that, oh my god, it's so easy to gank me. Either way, I don't think this change is a big deal for bot lane. Overall, it's about the same in my opinion. It's just that mid and top is a lot harder to gank. I think I would have liked, in this case, if they made solo lanes harder to gank, why not make bot lane harder to gank as well? The thing is that bot lane is already harder to gank because a lot of champions are the sort of disengaged type and they can peel off ganks, plus they have 2 trinkets, so it's easier to defend themselves. On the other hand, you can make the argument that the enemy bot lane also has another champion that can set up a gank, and you can kill one player by hitting him with 3 players instead of 2, which happens in solo lanes, so technically it's also more damage on one target, and you have 2 trinkets in order to deny vision. But all in all, I think it's alright. I'm not gonna discuss this topic too much, we are already almost 20 minutes into this video. And we haven't even started talking about items yet, which is probably gonna take like an hour. Might be a long video, guys. Take your popcorn, enjoy it on the second monitor. Anyways, they also made a change to the jungle, which is very weird because, okay, here's the thing, guys. Let's say, imagine you are blue side, right? And you clear your raptors that are on the left side here. Look how easy it is to just go into the enemy blue buff and start hitting it. Isn't that just a little stupid? Like, I understand this terrain is interesting for vision and teamfights at objectives, but what about this access to the enemy camps? Because you can just do your raptors at level 1, then go straight into blue buff and grump if you have some information. And then if the enemy team collapses on you, once again you have a very easy way out. I don't think it's that different, and it's probably not gonna matter as much as I'm thinking right now and as much as some players are gonna think about it, but definitely invading early does seem a bit easier for a lot of champions. And this wall is pretty thick, but some champions can still jump over it, so I don't know how much that matters to, you know, actually disengage a fight or turn around. But hey, it just feels like the way is too open. I think they could have done something a bit better with this terrain. Though I don't mind the changes to the brush. Yeah, technically you can defend yourself better against certain evades. But let's see what Riot has to say. I'm a bit curious here. Finally, we adjusted geometry in the jungle to support these lane adjustments and a lot new way of new interest to Dragon and Baron fights. Okay, that's true. Access to these epic monster fights on live is relatively easy through a major choke point opposite a monster, or minor choke points deeper into river or the jungle further out. The latest adjustments aim to shift away from a single choke point and focus combat around multiple entries, as well as generally overhaul how these fights play out, as this space is quite solved and players are very used to this macro. Contesting should be a little more equal across sides, as it currently tends to advantage the team who can comfortably engage and escape from an objective. I agree, and I remember playing some low-key competitive environments with teams, and it always felt extremely lame to approach a lot of objective fights. You just felt like you had no options. You just get suffocated and you couldn't enter. You just have to give up the objective. It could just be impossible to enter in any way for so many years, and you just feel locked up, because it's not like in solo queue where people are not coordinated at all, they don't have voice chat, and you can just find angles to do random stuff, maybe a little flank, maybe people don't group up at the right time and they come one by one, you have set some random setup yourself. So I think this should help objective fights, but what about the early game thing that I said? These adjustments, as noted above, also do help roaming quite a bit, as there is a safe secondary path for both teams that doesn't involve any jungle movement. Well, this is a little bit true, you can just take this path, but all in all, our goal is that junglers should have a harder time ganking, especially early, but shouldn't feel like they have no more agency over the game. That is alright, as long as they make up for other things. We'll see how the jungle role ends up being. Anyway, another terrain change is Infernal map. Now instead of Infernal Rift destroying walls, you're gonna have Infernal Cinders. This is basically Hell Tide if you ever play Diablo 4 in League of Legends. It works almost the exact same way. You collect cinders, you die, you drop half of them, other players can collect it. Apparently, they're gonna get 0.3 ability haste per stack. On that, up to 5 cinders can be maintained, with some of the remainder being dropped on the ground and the rest being destroyed. Cinders drop from player dead, so again the burst of speed upon pick up. Oh, they actually changed this a bit. It used to be like half of them. So you can just stack a crazy amount of cinders because some of them are destroyed. Interesting. Anyway, you get a very small amount of ability haste, even if you get, let's say, 20 of them, it's gonna be 6 ability haste, right? Which is a pretty small amount, and trust me, it's not that easy to even get to 20 cinders. It's mostly just something that you pick up as you are walking to places, sort of like Bard passive kinda, they give you a bit of movement speed once picked up. It's anyways more interesting in terms of gameplay. It felt pretty fun to play around it when I encountered the Infernal map on PB. I would like more changes like that, to be fair, it's cool. Anyway, they gave Hwei 3 armor. The champion is quite strong, maybe even overpowered, and I've seen a Riot Freak talk about Hwei, and they're just saying that they want to buff Hwei because he's low in it, and they want people to be motivated to play him more and learn him, and if he gets too strong, they're just gonna nerf him along the way, because they want Hwei to be good right now. That is an interesting approach to balance, and I assume that the champion is gonna get nerfed, especially once people discover it more. Maybe they'll make some kind of guides. Imagine somebody gets really good at this champion, they make a very detailed guide where they explain a lot that people might be missing, and then it gets popular, more and more people start getting that information, and then the champion gets higher and higher win rate, it looks stronger and stronger and stronger, and of course you're gonna have him probably dominate a little bit of pro play. From what I'm looking at when I see his current kit, and then he's eventually gonna end up getting nerfed, I assume, because I really think the champion has enormous potential and already shows a lot of players that it can be incredibly strong in a lot of situations. And it's also incredibly versatile. Hwei has pretty long range, a bit of poke, CC, utility, big potential, and a kind of solid laning phase. It's definitely interesting. Anyway, they adjusted the jungle damage when you are clearing, because they are saying that because of the terrain changes, a lot of ganking junglers such as Nunu are going to get nerfed. Therefore, they want to reduce the damage that comes from the champion kit when it comes to clearing, and buff the damage that comes from the jungle pet. So I assume that farming junglers are gonna have roughly around the same clear speed, but the junglers that are kind of like tanks that clear pretty slow, or who knows what, are going to be a little bit better, in a better spot. I don't think this is going to matter too much, and you probably shouldn't play those champions anyway. With all of those jungle changes that happened, you should play a champion that is self-sufficient and is able to gather resources. Anyway, now we are getting to items, mage items. Count the Shattered Queen, Everfrost, Leeching Leer, Demonic Embrace, and Stopwatch, perfect time stopwatch. Goodbye stopwatch, nobody will miss you. Disgusting. Are removed from the game. And I understand why they removed, for example, Crown of the Shattered Queen, because if it was made into a legendary, okay, note, they removed mythics, and now they're switching some mythic items into legendary items. But yeah, I understand why they would remove Crown of the Shattered Queen, because if you make it a legendary, then you can buy it on every mage. Every mage is gonna be like a damage item, Rabadon, and then Crown. Every game, something like that is gonna happen. So you can't really make Crown into a legendary. It had to be a mythic, because that kind of power could only be allocated if you had this mythic system where you can only choose one of the powerful options. And similarly, Everfrost only functioned because of the mythic system. You could give an item hard CC, but if you make Everfrost a legendary, then you can, again, kind of take Everfrost on every champion. Not necessarily, Everfrost isn't really like that, but you know, you already have Relay for CC. There's no point to have hard CC on a legendary item. It's just silly, in my opinion. So it makes sense that they remove these items with a purpose. Leeching Leer because they changed how Riftmaker works, Demonic Embrace because they're gonna essentially make another Demonic Embrace. You'll see, it's pretty obvious, probably know already. So Riftmaker now is 3k gold, which is a reasonable price. It matches with a few other, let's say, fighter items like Black Cleaver, Spear of Shojin, and so on, right? It's definitely more reasonable. Haunting Guise, we'll look at that in a second, plus Fiendish Codex and 800 gold. The build pad is quite amazing. Riftmaker always needed a Fiendish Codex because Fiendish Codex is a pretty gold efficient component, as in it has kind of everything you need in an item for a sustained gameplay pattern. And if you are looking to buy Riftmaker, your champion does sustained damage, of course. So you want the early CDR to be able to, for example, get one of your spells a second time in a trade or an extended trade, right? Or even a third time for some local down abilities. And Haunting Guise is also the same thing. It's gonna be ramping damage. We'll look at the item in a second, which you also want. You needed this kind of spike. While Leeching Leer was actually not that bad of a component, it's not necessarily what you wanted when you are building Riftmaker. Now, I wouldn't mind Leeching Leer and Fiendish Codex, it would still be an okay build pad, but Haunting Guise just offers more power, and now with Codex and the item being cheaper, even though it's a legendary and it doesn't have that powerful pre-mitigation true damage increase, it's still gonna be really good. So it has more ability power while being cheaper. And I also have to mention that old Riftmaker was, even though the passive was really powerful, the build pad and the stats on the item plus the price were making the item quite terrible and really unsatisfying and a pain to build, as most Riftmaker champions would just flat out lose the lane before they would get to Riftmaker, or they wouldn't be able to clear the jungle, if they were a jungler of course, because the build pad was just not giving them what they need. Plus a relatively expensive item, like not too cheap. Let's not over-explain our Riftmaker. Anyways, now you gain 10% melee, 6% range Omnivamp, which works at 100% efficiency. It's not at 3% for AoE anymore. At least I'm guessing, since it's the only source of Omnivamp in the game, and they said that it's gonna be like that. Let's see what it reads here. I just noticed the line. Omnivamp value the following Omnivamp heals for percentage of damage dealt, with reduced effect 20% effectiveness on minions and monsters. Additionally, Omnivamp heals you for the full amount with pet AoE damage. So if you randomly stack it, but you can also get to hit the wave, you're not just going to heal a crazy amount on the wave. Though it's going to work properly against champions. So if you hit them with Mordekaiser passive and AoE Q, E, whatever, is going to give you the full healing. And Udyr R, by the way, Udyr endures, so this is really going to be a decent item. It has the old demonic passive, which gives you ability power based on bonus health, which is obviously great. A lot of Riftmaker champions will look to build other HP items like Realize, Crystal Scepter, Spirit Visage, and whatnot. Maybe some other items that we're going to look at in a second. A small problem is that it stacks in 5 seconds now instead of 3. 5 seconds is a little long, but overall the item has better stats. It's nice to build into. I would say I'm happy with how Riftmaker landed, and I want to focus on that a bit right now, because for the whole history of League of Legends, we never had a proper ability power, just magic fighter item. And I think Riftmaker is finally delivering that goal. You are gonna feel good about playing something like Mordekaiser with this, or even Gwen, Udyr and whatnot, and who knows what other characters. Interesting that they already made it 6% for ranged. I'm not sure if that was there on PB. Then we have Maligance and Luden's Companion. We're gonna look at this kind of at the same time because it's 2 of the 3 Lost Chapter items. The other Lost Chapter item is Archangel's Staff, so Seraph's Embrace. We have 3 Lost Chapter items now. So these are your options for most mages that want the AP, mana and haste archetype. The Lost Chapter for power in the laning phase. Malignance is a really quite a cheap mage item, has the price of Everfrost and Crown on the current patch. Lost Chapter Fiendish Codex, really good build path, nice stats, gain 20 ability haste for your ultimate, so this is going to be great for some champions. For example, it's going to help Kassadin dash more often, it's going to help Anivia reposition her ultimate, or if it gets cancelled or something like that. And these are some of the champions that could potentially use this item. It's going to help Swain with more uptime, and so on. Whenever you damage an enemy champion with your ultimate, burn the ground beneath them for 3 seconds. I don't know exactly how good this is, because I would assume ideally you need a champion that has slows or to build Relay in order to keep them in the zone. I would assume the damage, the base damage is pretty high. I would say 60 per second is quite high. It's definitely quite high. The AP ratio on the other hand is low, so it has good base damage, and on top of that it reduces magic resist. It says 1 per user level, so you can get up to 18 magic pen. Overall this item has a lot of power in it for a pretty low price. It just has to be on the right champion, because you'll see that Luden's Companion is also pretty decent for a lot of mages. And there are some mages that don't have the best ult uptime that might want to look into it if they want to get this kind of power. I'm thinking maybe Annie. If you have this on Annie with Relay, you can just abuse your T-Burst a little bit, kind of. I would hope that when T-Burst is hitting people, he's proccing this item, not just when you cast the spell. Otherwise it would be a little bit useless, but hey, we'll see what happens. Luden's Companion is similar to, you know, Luden's Tempest, Luden's Echo, whatever, except you gain charges up to a maximum of 6, and then they deal 40 plus 8%, okay, of course a charge time of 3 seconds, so it has a DPS component to it. It's really low cooldown, that maybe can even get reduced by Ingenious Hunter to 2 seconds, so that's something you can combine with this item to have even more DPS. But you probably don't need it because a lot of champions are not gonna throw a spell every 2 seconds, right? So if the target is isolated, I assume you are gonna deal extra damage, but the other charges are going to deal less. So it's gonna deal a big burst when you are at 6 stacks, and then also provide you with some DPS. And this is gonna be the standard mage item. You're gonna see this being the best option for a lot of mages, especially the ones looking to poke Syndra, Zerath, Orianna. You will just see a lot of these champions utilizing this item. It's pretty solid, and I prefer this system. I prefer Maligance and Luden's Companion, even though a lot of champions will be locked to one. There will be very few champions who would look to situationally build one of these, but I still like this more than, oh, go Liandry against tanky champions, or if you are a dot champ, go Luden against squishy champions. That is even more boring than this. So I really don't mind this. Plus you have Archangel Staff as more of the defensive option, similarly to Crown and Everfrost. And we'll see something more about Archangel in a moment. That it should be pretty obvious. Anyway, Stormsurge is a very interesting item. It has 100 AP, 10 pen, and 5% movement speed. With Storm Raider's Surge, the old keystone before they reworked the runes and masteries, something similar here. 35% of a champion's maximum health. Within 3 seconds, applies Storm Surge to them and grants the user 35% movement speed for 2 seconds. 30-second cooldown. Passive Storm Surge. After 2 seconds, Storm Surge strikes the target with lightning, dealing pretty high base damage with a pretty high AP ratio, magic damage to them. If they die to the lightning or before the lightning strikes, it detonates immediately in a large area around them, and you gain 30 gold. I'm not sure if the PBE version had this component, if they die to the lightning. I think it was only if they die before the lightning strikes. Now, this is even more interesting, because you can use the lightning to execute if you get them in that threshold. And then it's gonna detonate in a large area, which means that it's gonna deal the base damage in a large area and have a strong impact in a team fight if you can burst a squishy target. This is just going to be purchased on burst mages and AP assassins against squishies. It's going to be a pretty popular item, I assume. It's relatively well priced with a pretty good build pet. Hextech Alternator has 50 AP and 2 emblems right now. And we will notice that a lot of players will build this, but it's quite limited in some sense, because the cooldown is 30 seconds and the stats aren't amazing. They are great, don't get me wrong, for just bursting a target. It's pretty glass cannon, but if you are hitting, let's say, a tanky target, for example, you will be forced to use your spell rotation if the enemy bruiser or tank is frontlining, and if you proc this passive on them, it's not gonna deal that much damage, especially if they are not fed, they have some magic resist. Of course, it also might be hard to reach this 35% threshold, and you might in some cases even intentionally try to spread out your damage a bit so that you don't waste this effect by triggering it on an unwanted target. But hey, if you manage to hit a squishy target with it, it's gonna be great. But you have to be careful in which spots you build it, especially since they buffed some magic resist itemization, which we'll see in a moment. Hextech Rocketbelt is returned in its old version, really cheap, decent stats, good build pet, and the base damage on the active is quite high. You can get like 200 damage the moment you buy it, which is quite high burst damage for an item that you can get so early. I mean, like, think about it, if you get a bit of a lead early, it's essentially like a 2k gold item. You are gonna get it really easily and really fast, and it might even help some support champions. Like, I don't know exactly what, but we could even see like some Hextech Rocketbelt allies start jumping into your family at dinner because Alistar got so many AP buffs and you can just press R and be unkillable anyway. Of course, like some like Nico support. You could even see this on Rakan. Like it's a pretty decent item for how cheap it is. Definitely it's gonna open up a lot of power for something like Echo. You are gonna get Rocketbelt really early. It's gonna help you contribute to the game. Then you are gonna get your Rabadon third item so much quicker, which is such a big spike when you really start one-shotting people with your just like E Lich Bane passive proc electrocute combo. Anyway, Haunting Guise, it's similar and it's almost 100 gold efficiency with the stats from what I looked at. The passive goes up to 6%. If you remember the Haunting Guise in Season 10, it was 200 gold more expensive, but it went to 10%. Either way, it's going to be just as good in the first few seconds of combat while being cheaper, so you'd only care about the damage loss later, but it being so much cheaper is definitely solid. And Haunting Guise is gonna item. You're gonna get a bit of a spike on these sustained fighters and it's gonna build into Riftmaker and Liandry Torment, we'll see in a second, which is here. Liandry Torment, Hextech Alternator. It's just a burst oriented item. I don't know why it had HP. This item is supposed to be bought for burst. It's just burst. You want to one-shot someone when you purchase this. 50 AP, 1100 gold. This is very nice. This is actually a strong mage component. They are making mage components quite better. They ended up buffing last chapter. Now you have Haunting Guise and Hextech Alternator being good, so mage components are getting quite a bit better, which is gonna make mages feel a bit happier, because yes, a lot of mage items were quite strong, but building into them was pretty terrible. Except for when they Giga buff last chapter, that was like the only good mage component. Liandry Torment, Haunting Guise Blasting Wand is also getting buffed, unless they change their mind, but that was on PB. Damage kept to monsters per second, 50. Was it 100 in Season 10? I don't think it was 100 with Liandry's Anguish. This might be weird. Anyways, we get 2% max health, so it doesn't deal extra bonus damage when targets are CC'd and stuff like that. It's just consistent. And 90 AP 300 health. It's pretty decent if you compare it to all the other Stormment in Season 10, if you guys are curious about that. The burn damage was lower if the target wasn't CC'd, but if it was CC'd, it used to be a bit higher than this. Though it also had 15 less AP, which is a lot, and it was a bit more expensive. Also, the damage scaled up to 10%. This is 6 like Haunting Guise, which is completely fine. It has more AP, it's cheaper, the max health is more consistent. Overall, Liandry Torment is going to replace Demonic Embrace. It's going to be great for a lot of sustained fighters and mages, maybe for poking, but you also have a lot of options if you are a poke and DPS for mages in this new system. So you will not really look at Liandry Torment being that great, when in Season 10 it was pretty much like the best mage item, especially as a second purchase and even first for a lot of characters. And of course, you're probably still gonna buy this on Hoodie, for example. You're gonna replace Demonic with this. It's essentially the same item, it has the same purpose. Horizon Focus is more niched now. 90 AP, 20 ability haste, Alternator Codex, amazing build pet, very cheap, and it no longer works on any type of CC. It's simply the artillery item. It works extremely well at range. So for Zerath, maybe Vel'Koz, Ziggs, it might be really nice, and it still has this hyper shot reveal for 6 seconds, which I think is generally a pretty underrated thing, especially around objectives. And now it's even stronger. On a 30 seconds cooldown, you're gonna get some kind of blue orb when you hit champions. So Horizon Focus comes with extra utility. You'll definitely probably see this item as best in slot for a second purchase on a bunch of champions. I just see no way, no world in which you are not buying Horizon Focus consistently, unless you play against a lot of champions that get into your face. You might be thinking, well, it's gonna be a little hard to use this range. Let's say I'm playing Vel'Koz, they're jumping on me all the time. Maybe I'll rather have more consistent damage at close range from maybe a Deathcap or something than to use this for poke. But overall, it should be a very sought item for this kind of characters. Seeker's Armguard is pretty interesting. So it has 45 AP, 25 armor, and it's a pretty big commitment. Like, if you want to buy a Seeker's Armguard early, you have to delay your items by a lot. Even if you go Lost Chapter Armguard, you're gonna spend almost 3k gold, and if an assassin buys a cheap item, he's still gonna spike way faster and you'll have some room to, you know, attack the game a little bit. But anyway, this is the way they reintroduced stopwatch into the game. Now it's only on Armguard. So this is a mini Zhonya, that's how you should see it. It's gonna become broken Armguard. Very interesting, this Seeker's Armguard. I wonder how much people are going to actually buy it into assassins. The stats on it aren't great in terms of efficiency for just for the price, but obviously it should be like that for it to be balanced. And 25 armor isn't crazy. Like, you still die to an assassin as a squishy mage if he's ahead, even if you have 25 armor, of course. I like this version more than whatever they have done so far with the farming and whatnot. It just looks clean. A lot of the items, in my opinion, got cleaned up as they work how I would imagine they are supposed to work. Cryptbloom is Blighting Jewel, Fiendish Codex, relatively cheap for a mage item, and it has 60 AP, 10 haste, 30% magic penetration. Huh, very interesting. It used to have better stats on PB, but they ended up nerfing them. I don't know if this is a typo or Riot actually thought this item was a little too powerful for some reason. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but if you compare it to Void stuff, I don't know, maybe we can find Void stuff here. There you go. It has 40 pen, 80 AP, and it's 3k gold. Blasting one Blighting Jewel. So comparing it to that item, you lose 10% pen, 20 AP, but you get 10 haste. And it's 150 gold cheaper. Now, what I don't really understand is, on PB it had about 70 AP and 15 haste, which meant that, yes, you can think, hey, I'm gonna buy Cryptbloom when my champion cares more about haste and less about the percentage pen. I still get a good amount of penetration to make my damage relevant, especially if it's high base damage, but now I have more CC, more utility, and I get this interesting passive, Life from Death. Whenever you get a takedown on an enemy champion within 3 seconds of damaging them, create a healing nova on their location that heals allies for 50 plus 50% AP, 60 seconds cooldown. I think this passive is quite luxury, and it's quite hard to get proper value out of this. I'm just really thinking, now that they ended up making the stats pretty low, and it's hard to have a stat comparison between Void stuff and this item, so they clearly think that yes, this item should have lower stats because the passive is reasonably strong and it should be a more you know, it should just have less stats because we want to emphasize this passive, I think it's just not gonna be that useful. And arguably you can get this on any mage that would want some ability haste, but now the number is just a little low, 10 AP. You know, the information might be wrong, it happens quite often in patch notes, although maybe they triple checked these patch notes for season 14 to make sure everything is right and whatnot. But hey, we'll see. I'm just thinking that this is not very reliable, so whenever you get a taken on enemy champion, 3 seconds of damaging them, create a healing nova on their location that heals allies. So even if you, like, let's say you get a kill at the start of a fight, then you are gonna send potentially 250 HP for your team. That is a decent amount, but nothing too crazy. You could say, well, I gave my team 1k healing in total. And if you do that with 2 takedowns, let's say, well, now I'm gonna have 2k healing done from this item in that team fight. And then you could say, well, that was pretty big amount of healing. This item is quite strong. And I guess that's gonna be the way you have to think about this item. If you have a target that is easy to kill, just really reliable, let's say maybe you can burst someone easily because anyone on their team might be an easy target for you. For example, you are playing Veigar and you are head, or Syndra and you are head. Of course, you're just gonna blow your rotation, kill the first guy that might be playing Kamikaze anyway, and then that also heals your team a bit and makes the team fight simply easier because now the enemy team just has to deal more damage. That's the way I see Cryptbloom. We'll have to see how it ends up. If it's too weak, if no one buys it over void stuff, then Riot is gonna end up buffing it, of course. The more I think about it, the item has some potential. You just have to be kind of smart about when you buy it over void stuff, because it's just a trade-off, similar to LDR and Molten Reminder. Sometimes it's gonna be a pretty close choice. You're gonna be like, should I buy LDR here? They are pretty tanky with max health, but they also have a lot of healing. Maybe I'll go Mortal Reminder just to reduce their healing. Maybe that's gonna be more valuable than LDR. It's a similar situation, but an even bigger decision, because that one is more mathematical, a little bit situation based, but Cryptbloom has a bit of depth to it. It's definitely interesting to me. We'll see how it lands, really. Yeah, let's just switch to the next slide. I talked enough about Shadowflame. I'm passionate about interesting items like this. They should add more items like Cryptbloom, I think. So Shadowflame has 10 pen and 120 ability power, large rod and alternator. A pretty heavy build pad in terms of the judge is getting a lot of raw AP here. Interesting. Cinderbloom, magic damage and true damage. Critical strikes enemies below 25% health, doing 20% increased damage. Increase to 30% increased damage for damage over time and pet effects. So when targets are low, you are going to deal extra damage. That is a simple way to see it. But, here's the but. Is this going to be better than, let's say, Stormsurge or Rabadon? Or, you know, the Lost Chapter items that you'll buy anyway? Is it going to be better than Void stuff? Is it going to be better than Cryptbloom? Is it going to be better than Horizon Focus? It's hard for me to justify this item right now. And I think the key to look at this item is that, let's say that a bruiser or a tank has about 3k HP, which is a thing some champions can reach in mid-game, then they are gonna be at about 1k health when they reach this threshold, which means that they just have a lot more health to burn through when you trigger this effect, whereas if you would kill a squishy target, not only it's usually overkilled if you play a champion that is looking to buy items like this for burst, But you also have to consider teammates, damage, and so on. So, since Stormsurge isn't really useful against fighters and tanks, if you are solo AP and you happen to have more of a bursty champion with longer cooldowns perhaps, you might want to consider this if there's no need for void stuff. Because like I said, Stormsurge is only really good against squishies by design. I don't know if the numbers exactly are gonna tell you, yeah, Stormsurge is completely useless against some tanky characters. But Shadowflame, to me, it looks like it's the type of item where, yes, I'm kind of solo AP, playing a heavy damage dealer, and I want to kill some tankier targets. Otherwise, it's gonna be a bait if you really think this passive is gonna be useful, because it's not a lot of damage and it has a threshold. Also, it's a bit more expensive than other AP items. And like I said, you are gonna want to buy Rabadon, which is usually gonna be better than Shadowflame anyway. And they're a pretty similar item. They build out of large rod, they're pretty expensive. So most of the time you just want Rabadon because it's just going to be more damage and more consistent damage and more poke damage. Shadowflame is pretty terrible for poke because, well, it doesn't do anything when the targets are healthy. It's not a poke item really. It's more of an execute item. And it's also going to be pretty nice for champions with high base damage. Like, even though Zyra is more of a poke champion, I could see this being built on Zyra because her ratios suck for Rabadon, and she can't really use Stormsurge either, and this is gonna end up giving a balance of just having enough damage to finish targets off and having good stats to poke them. We'll really see what happens with this item. And of course you could be like, well, I already have those items, I can simply buy Shadowflame in late game as my 4th or 5th slot, excluding boots. Amplifying Tome is 400 gold finally. I really like this change. Like I said, the Mage components were pretty silly. As I said before, Riot always makes typos in patch notes. They meant to show the old blasting wand here. The cost is the same, of course, we all know that, except that ability power was increased by 5. Probably because they made Amplifying Tome cheaper. I like that Amplifying Tome is 400 gold. It just was a little too expensive, a little lame to buy Amplifying Tomes, just not having that 35 gold on bases. This is really nice, 400 gold Amplifying Tome. This large rod is also buffed. It matches BF sort of a bit better, I suppose, although... yeah, I'm not sure if 70 was needed. I think a 65 would be more appropriate. Zhonya's Hourglass has a lot more AP, no ability haste, and it's also more expensive. Needlessly Roach plus Verdant Barrier, another typo, it's Seeker's Armguard. Classic Riot games, what did I tell you guys? Yeah, Verdant Barrier on Banshee's Veil as well. You'll see something very interesting about Banshee's Veil. I should mention it right here. Yes, it's a very expensive item now, compared to what it used to be. It has a lot more AP and magic resist, no ability haste, so it kind of matches Zhonya's Hourglass, except it's a bit cheaper because Banshee's Veil is a lot less powerful than Zhonya's active, obviously. So now it has a spell shield on a 30-second cooldown. But Verdant Barrier is now a 1800 gold item, similar price to Seeker's Armguard. M-Tome non-magic mantle, 40 AP, 30 MR, but you now get the Banshee's Veil for 1800 gold. Spell shield on a 60 seconds cooldown. This is really an amazing idea that Riot came up with. So now instead of paying 2600 gold for Banshee, you're paying only 1800 gold, so you're getting this much earlier. You actually have some counterplay if you're a mage to play into another mage. You can go Lost Chapter into Verdant Barrier to actually counter some champions or just nullify them a bit. deal with them in a certain way. And it lines up pretty well. Lost Chapter plus Verdant Barrier is pretty much going to be a different kind of first item in its own right. You know what I mean? It's going to give you about the same amount of stats as Luden's Companion, if not a little bit more if you really think about the 30 MR. And instead of having damage, you're gonna get the shield. Hey. Yeah, the shield and the MR, so that's something you can do on certain mages. I really like this change. The mage itemization is definitely getting a lot more interesting this season. This is the third Lost Chapter item that I talked about earlier. You have Needless Large Rod, Kindle Gem, Tear of the Goddess and all build pad, not just Lost Chapter Codex, Tear of the Goddess. Amazing, amazing build pad. This is just really incredibly good for a lot of mages, especially the ones that rely on mana, like Cassiopeia, Rise, Kassadin and whatnot. You have Tear and Lost Chapter, even a Fiendish Codex in the build pad. The build pad is just unreal good. 20 haste, 600 mana, 80 ability power, and gain ability power equal to 1 bonus mana, which is going to be 2% bonus mana with Seraph's Embrace. You can see the stats here. You are simply upgrading the passive, you are getting the Lifeline Shield. When you get low HP, it's going to trigger the Seraph's Embrace. Anyways, now you can do a lot of stuff like Tear plus Lost Chapter on Cassiopeia, and then go into Relay and complete the Seraphs later, because you only need to complete it early. You can do Tear, Lost Chapter, and get Rod of Ages. Even if you delay it a bit, it's still not that delayed. You still get the Lost Chapter power in lane. A lot of mages might be really happy about that. Overall, yeah, Archangel's Staff is going to be one of the best mage items in this new system, for sure. Especially, yeah, it sucks to build Tear in a lot of cases. You can still do Lost Chapter into another item, maybe build Tear a bit later. You might get it a little late and it could suck, but there are definitely some mix-ups you can do. And it's gonna be nice against some assassins as well. You just want to survive a team with a lot of burst. You might not care about Luden's Companion having some extra damage. Plus you're gonna get a bit more EP from Seraph's Embrace, so that is gonna make up for some of the damage loss. Anyway, Rabadon's Deathcap has less percentage and more flat AP. It's gonna be better until about 4th item, I think. It's also interesting because it seems that there's a lot more ability power in this system, so yeah, we're gonna get a lot from the percentage bonus anyway. Rabadon's Deathcap, I don't think it needed this buff because it was simply strong enough, especially if you consider it in this new system. I think they should end up nerfing it a little bit, but maybe not. It's also the most expensive item in the game. Who knows? Rabadon's Deathcap is definitely one of the most broken items in League of Legends, if not the most broken item in League of Legends, and now with a lot of items just overall being more cheaper, more effective, more glass cannon with more AP, Rabadon's Deathcap is winning a lot from these changes. Large Rod is also getting a direct buff. So Rabadon's Deathcap really strong as a second item with all this flat AP. You should expect to see Deathcap as a second item a lot more often, a lot of champions, if of course people pick up on these things, especially with games being slower, and you'll see something that actually makes the game slower later down the line in these patch notes that I've actually noticed just looking at the list a little bit, see what's happening in the patch. So yeah, they also ended up making void stuff a bit more expensive, which makes sense because, like, for example, your first item is generally cheaper. Your void stuff should come up later, and on top of that, I think void stuff should be more expensive. And why is that? Also, it's getting a slight buff in terms of gold efficiency. 200 gold is 10 AP, but it's getting 50 AP. It's definitely a slight buff, but I think it should be more expensive simply because they are giving mages a lot of power in components, in their options, in their completed items. Therefore, the anti-tank item, when tanks are the class that is supposed to counter mages for the most part, well, at least that's what Riot said that they are intending, and it makes sense to me. And we'll see that in the MR itemization as well. But why do I think mages should be countered by tanks? So we have to look at the whole system in a way. As in, marksmen are the class that is supposed to be extremely good at dealing with tanky targets, just tanks, juggernauts, some heavy fighters and stuff like that. That is their main job, and because of that, most of them have no burst. It's like a low burst class, lower range, no CC, squishier. Or on the other hand, mages have long range, CC, AoE more consistently. This is a generalization, obviously, because it depends from champion to champion. But especially the poke, range, CC, which is stuff that marksmen don't really have. Even a utility AD carry like Ashe, well, she's not gonna have... She comes with CC, but she's not gonna have heavy poke and burst like a lot of mages have. So mages are really good at a lot of things, and they need to be kept in check by tanks, because otherwise you'll have no counterplay, especially against these longer range mages. They'll have to be engaged by tanks somehow and tanked by tanks somehow, so that you can somehow reach these characters. Otherwise we are going to play tower defense with Ziggs, right? It makes sense that the MR itemization should get a bit stronger if also the mage itemization gets stronger, and that's a good way to make the game more satisfying for mages and for tanks and for the other players that play around these systems, right? I think overall it should be pretty balanced. So, as we can see here, a lot of ages is getting cheaper, getting demoted to a legendary. It's relatively cheap, 50 AP. So, if you look here, it lost about 133 gold in terms of stats, if you don't count the mana. I'm not gonna count the mana, it doesn't really matter that you lost 100 mana from a lot of ages, although of course it's gonna impact some situations. It's still gonna stack the same amount of stats, still gonna have the same passive, but you're not gonna get movement speed anymore. And of course you still gain the level. So Rod of Ages, I mean, it should probably have like 55 AP for this item to be good. I think something like that would round up to a nice number. But hey, it's not too bad. Rod of Ages is still gonna do its job for some champions. You might still build this on Twisted Fate, for example, like you used to, just to be durable and have a smooth build path, so you can just follow up with Lich Bane, Zhonya, Deathcap, and so on. Twisted Fate kind of like this itemization with all the buffs that you get. I don't know if it's going to be particularly good, but still. Catalyst of Eons got buff. Huh. Yeah, that's really nice. At least they buffed Catalyst of Eons, even if they nerfed Rod of Ages a little bit. Well, it was a mythic, so it was kind of overstated on purpose. This is still pretty decent. Lich Bane. So the item recipe is Shin, Alternator, Etherwisp. More offensive build path with the Alternator. I really like that. Also Shin got a little changed, so ability haste unchanged. AP went up, thank god, it just gave too little AP for this kind of item. It's a little bit expensive. Spellblade now grants 50% attack speed while available. Wow! Anyways, unique passive spell every day. Oh, they made it 100 base AD. You know, I would actually consider buying this item on all Luden, especially with this Spellblade now grants 50% attack speed while available. That is so nice, you can just get your attack quicker and get into casting spells quicker. This is just such a nice and underrated change. Like, imagine you play Victor, you can just get this auto attack really fast, really fast now, and then reposition yourself. This is amazing change by Riot. And Lich Bane was such an under-purchased item because you just couldn't really buy it on so many champions. You almost could never buy Lich Bane, maybe as a last item on some champions that have like low range. Let's say Lich Bane Ahri was a viable thing. If you had like, let's say Luden, Deathcap, Void, Zhonya, actually, let's say Shadowflame second, maybe, or Shadowflame, okay, let's say Luden, Shadowflame, Deathcap, Void, and then if you want even more damage with some mobility, you'd go Lich Bane to like one-shot some noobs when you go in close range because your champion is like shitty range. Like, yeah, you'll never see a Lich Bane in League of Legends except like Fizz Echo. But this is a lot more viable now in my opinion. This is just definitely feels nice. You can get it on a LeBlanc, you hit that turret, you can get it on Victor for sure. It's just nice, I like Lich Bane. Anyway, Nashor Stud. I noticed this problem. Nashor Stud was just way too expensive and it made it feel really bad to buy, especially because you want this item first as a rush. It really felt awful that it was 200 gold more expensive in a lot of cases, because it should just come online a bit too slow. Because when you play an Nashor Stud champion, let's say Kayle, Teemo, Gwen, whatever, Diana, the build path isn't particularly good. Like, it isn't terrible, but it wasn't very nice anyway. So you would really be like struggling to get there. Yes, give me the Nashor Stud anytime soon to actually get your power spike and be useful. And 3200 gold was just a bit too much. 3k gold is a much better price. It simply lost 10 EP, the gold efficiency is the same. Recurve Ball, Blasting Wand, Finish Codex, change to Recurve Ball, Blasting... Okay, it's the same build path. Just, you know, they shouldn't even add this, because it's the same build path, but okay, right, no problem, it's 200 gold difference, I get it. You can literally read it here, nobody would ever want to read this line, but if that's how you want to write your patch notes, no problem. Who am I to judge? The passive didn't change, so nothing changed. Nashor Stud is just an easier item to build. In very rare cases it's gonna be a nerf, but overall, just getting the item faster and your future items faster, it makes Nashor Stud better in my opinion. Morelonomicon. So I see what they did here. It might not be obvious, or you just might not think about it, but if you look at live items, you have Chemtech Purifier, which they removed its ability to empower your allies with healing reduction. Instead, they basically said, well, now if you are Lulu, you have to actually hit Qs in order to reduce healing when you buy Chemtech Purifier. Hit Qs, use your E, maybe, I don't know exactly if it works on passive, if you put it on an ally, but you had to deal damage. So essentially Chemtech Purifier functioned the same way as Morello, they just had a different profile. So now they decided to make it the same item by reducing its cost by a lot, so now you can go Morelonomicon on supports if you want to reduce healing reduction. 90 AP, 15 ability haste, pretty decent amount of stats for this gold, like definitely nothing too crazy, it's just really cheap, a pretty high amount of AP. Morelonomicon, solid item. Of course you'll still want to sit on Oblivion Orb for most of the game, but if you run out of slots and you just want a quick spike, I'm not sure how high the gold efficiency is on this, you can just get a Morelonomicon. I assume the gold efficiency is quite good. You are getting 2 blasting ones here, so that alone counts for most of the price without the ability, so it's a decent item. Now we are moving to Hullbreaker, which got reworked to some extent, and I really like these changes, because Hullbreaker was a bit too unbearable the way they designed it and balanced it ended up being pretty poor, because you just get a gross amount of resist, even though they nerfed that by a bit and it was pretty late game skewed. It just made certain situations pretty frustrating in the side lane. And on top of that, I think the minions were just way too tanky. I'm pretty sure they nerfed the resists by quite a bit. Either way, every 5th basic attack against champions and epic monsters. Every 5th basic attack against champions and epic monsters. I'm a little confused. So it doesn't work on turrets? Every 5th basic attack against champions and epic monsters. It does work against structures, right? I don't think you have to stack it on a champion and then hit a structure. That would just make the item useless. The wording is a bit weird here. I'm sure it does work on structures. Anyway, if you hit structures, it does a lot of damage. Scales with base AD and health, so if you have high base AD, high levels, and high health, which you're gonna have if you buy items like this, or you play Cyan, then you're going to deal pretty good DPS. And the DPS of this item is like pretty nice by itself. You just essentially get on-hit damage. It's simply every 5 auto attacks instead of every auto attack. And overall, it's not gonna be bad if you have a high attack speed character. Even if you don't split push, it might be a decent item, even if your main goal isn't to split push. And you don't have to be isolated in order to give armor and MR to minions, so you can use it to siege with your team a little bit. And it's not just randomly overpowered anymore. Hullbreaker, you know, it's just like a weird version of Trinity Force, really. Yeah. It has quite a lot of AD for 3k gold and decent stats, and movement speed is always nice to have. Especially in a speed pusher, you have to constantly move to avoid people collapsing on you. Anyways, Blade of Ruin King. It doesn't say that the total cost changed, but it got 100 gold cheaper, guys. Anyways, same stats. They're not listing the changes here, they're simply listing what the item does. Very weird. And the same thing with the Hullbreaker. Like, this is so odd. It's like different people took care of different sections in this patch notes. Because here you can see what changed and didn't change on items. And on Blade and Hullbreaker, you are simply seeing what the item does. It's just listed here, whatever. So the damage is the same, and now instead of dealing damage and slowing after 2 basic attacks, you simply just slow on the first basic attack without any damage. And I think that is very strong. You'll be surprised how strong this can be, because you just take someone with 1 auto attack randomly, and before you can space out of their second auto attack, you could avoid the old Blade of the Ruin King, because you could just run away after the first auto attack or space it, or it could be the first auto attack from Fog or something, and you could even, you know, dash or flash. But now you get hit by the first basic attack, you dash away, you can still catch the target, and it's a lot more powerful for picking people off and even kiting on some range champions. By the way, I think the slow is 50% on range on PB. Maybe they forgot to list that here, because on PB it said that the slow is 50% on range. They might have changed their mind, who knows. Phage is just like the old Phage, AD, health, 1100 gold, 20 movement speed for 2 seconds. Generally, solid item, almost 100% gold efficient. You are paying like 67 gold, I think, when I looked at the items for this movement speed passive, so yeah, it's solid, no big deal with Phage. Now we have Eclipse, which I think is gonna be one of the most solid items next season. It's really cheap, a lot of AD in the build pad, which helps a lot of champions with high ratios and some ability haste. The passive doesn't have movement speed anymore because it's not a mythic, they made it a legendary, you have to remove some power. But the damage got buffed, on live it's 6. And the shield got buffed by 5% AD ratio. The base is still the same. Cooldown still 6 seconds. So, hey, Eclipse is very solid. It's gonna be really good for some fighters and even assassins that want to go for a more sustained build path when they think that, well, it's not gonna be reliable to burst targets and go for assassinations. Spear of Shojin. This is a typo here, this is the old price of Spear of Shojin. Spear of Shojin cannot be 3300 gold because the item wouldn't justify that price, but hey, maybe Riot change it to have 500 HP, I don't know. I'm pretty sure these are typos. Spear of Shojin is supposed to be 200 gold cheaper than this while having 300 health. These are the stats of live Shojin. Pickaxe, Kindle Gem, Caulfield's Warhammer is the build pad for both PB and live. Maybe Riot change their mind and want to make Shojin 500 HP and a bit more expensive. But I actually doubt that they did that because 200 life for 200 gold is just a little too good of a deal. Passive. Spell hits grant stacks. Your spells deal 3% increase damage for each stack. Yeah, a lot of mistakes in this patch because it doesn't tell you that the stacks kept to 4. So Spear of Shojin should be 300 life. 3% increase damage that stacks to 12 up to 4 stacks, and that's the item. The rest on it is correct, so the build pad is obviously very nice even as a rush. Pickaxe and long swords and ruby crystal, that is just overall a nice build pad. And if you're a spellcaster, then you also get, on top of the pickaxe, you also get CDR as your ability, so it's one of the best build pads for a lot of characters, to be fair, which makes it pretty attractive as a rush. And they removed quite a lot of ability haste from fighter items, which means that if you really care about ability haste, you should look at Spear of Shojin, so long as you can make some use of this passive. Now, what I have to say is that this passive doesn't have to be amazing on your character to use Spear of Shojin, because it has other good stats in it. You just have to be able to use it at a decent level. If your champion is amazing with Spear of Shojin, like, let's say, maybe Hecarim or Skarner, which have a kind of high base damage consumable ability, then hey, even better. Yeah, Spear of Shojin is going to be great for just having spell damage and ability haste. It's like the spellcaster version. It's what Black Cleaver had to be for a very long time, but this just fits that niche better. I like Spear of Shojin. It's gonna be really interesting to play around with it on a couple different champions, my friends. Anyways, here we have Ravenous Hydra, which also has a bugged price. It's only 3300 gold. There's no way Riot is gonna make Ravenous Hydra this expensive. That just looks weird, but who knows, maybe they actually made Ravenous Hydra this expensive because it's a pretty odd number. Like, this might actually be correct changes, though we've seen that they already made some mistakes in this patch notes, so I'm quite skeptical. This is just way too high of a price for these stats, in my opinion, but hey, I know that Riot wants these things to be kind of expensive, you know what I'm saying? Because they don't want champions to have easy access to these Tiamat items. So it might indeed be the price, except that perhaps maybe they made the AD higher and it's a typo. Who even knows, my friends? It doesn't work on spells anymore. I think. Yeah, it's only attacks. So it doesn't work on spells anymore, just like all Ravenous Hydra, except it has ability haste. AD, ability haste, lifesteal, a pretty decent amount of these stats. I'm just thinking they went a bit too high on the price. We'll see what happens. The build pad is decent. It might be a shitty item. And Titanic Hydra also is 50 gold more expensive than live in PvE. Tiamat Ruby Crystal Kindle Gem. Now here I can be 100% sure that it's not a typo because it has a Kindle Gem and 20 ability haste. Who knows what Riot has done though. They also end up changing Tiamat, as far as I can see here, compared to PvE. I'm curious what is going to end up happening. It only has 30 AD, 450 HP, and 20 ability haste for this price. On PvE it had a lot more AD, 55 and 550 health. And I understand that a lot of Titanic Hydra champions probably like 20 ability haste. But it plays away from the pattern of the item, which was having kind of high burst damage. But they probably don't like the idea of a champion building an item that has a lot of health on it, which makes them hard to one-shot, but they also one-shot you in return. So Titanic Hydra looked quite a bit OP on PvE from what people played around with. And I think they decided, hey, the only thing we can really do to make this item not one-shot you is to give it ability haste. And I think this makes sense. We'll just see 30 AD just looks a little low. A little low and kind of hard to build for certain characters. But hey, if you really care about the wave clear, this is obviously going to be great for Shen, for example. 20 ability haste is a lot more valuable for a Scion than, let's say, about 20 AD. Basic attacks deal 1.5 maximum health. Bonus damage to your target and 3 max health to other enemies in a cone. It also works against structures. Yeah, I think the damage should be alright, and then it also has the auto attack reset active, which does pretty high max health damage. Yeah, I think it looked very OP on PvE because it had very high AD and HP, while allowing a lot of champions to one-shot you. This is a well-rounded version, and to be fair, it's gonna do its job. You're definitely gonna be able to rush this on Shen, where you need a wave clear, or a Warwick, a Trundle, in some cases. It's not a bad item. Yeah, but it's also changed. It has the active again. 80% physical damage to nearby enemies. 10 seconds cooldown. 25 AD, 2 longswords. It was 50 gold cheaper with 5 less AD on PvE. This is a bit of a stronger version. It's a lot more gold efficient. Then we also have Hardbound X, which is a really gold efficient component. Even though it has no passive, they simply made it really gold efficient to just be strong on its own, I guess. It doesn't really have a purpose in League. No passive is just stats. It's just nice for auto attackers, and it's gonna build into a few items. It's Dagger, Longsword, which means that the build path isn't very nice unless you're like a really good auto attacker, maybe some on hits, some on steroids. 25 attack speed and 20 AD. So, if you think about it, from what I calculated, this item was about like 1350 or 1400 gold or something. I don't really remember, but yeah, it's a pretty good component, and you'll see it builds into a few items. Stribaker, Phage, Pickaxe, Dagger, AD, attack speed, health. So it doesn't have CDR. It still has 20 movement speed when you hit targets, but only for 2 seconds. Any physical damage. So it's weird, because there are probably going to be a lot of champions that might want to build Stribaker, but they don't want and don't care about 20% attack speed. If they're more of a spellcaster, maybe. It's still going to do its job. You slow target and you even gain movement speed. 50 seconds cooldown. On a 15 seconds cooldown, it's quite low. I'm definitely thinking that this item might be a bit heavy to build, but it definitely is going to help some champions avoid getting kited and land their combos. Like, of course, Tribeca has a purpose, and you are going to build it when you have to engage on squishy ranged champions. I would simply like if instead of attack speed it had ability haste, then it would actually be a more well-rounded item and more viable, but you can just give ability haste to every item, I suppose. Maybe just making it cheaper with a little higher AD, like 60, maybe 500 health. If you don't want to give it too much damage, something like that would have probably been a bit more appropriate for Tribeca. Well, we'll see. It's definitely not something that you'll necessarily look to rush. Maybe it's still gonna be viable as a rush for some champions, especially if they are auto-takers. We'll have to see, and I don't mind Tribeca being more of a niche for auto-takers, because auto-takers care more about sitting on a target and avoid getting kited so they can, land more auto-takes. Anyway, Experimental Hexplate. This is also a pretty interesting item. It has Tunneler, which is a new component. You'll see it's decently gold efficient, and Noonquiver, which is one of the most amazing components in the game, especially for junglers. It really boosts your clear speed, so this component might make this item better than it actually seems, because you can snowball your early game a little bit. The stats on it are decent. You gain 30 ultimate ability haste, very interesting, similar to Maligance. Passive after casting your ult, gain 35% attack speed and 50% movement speed for 7 seconds. I just think that this item might be hard to justify as a rush for a lot of champions, because they will want more consistent power than when they cast their ultimate for 7 seconds. They'll want DPS in their clear, for example, in taking objectives as a jungler, to actually trade in lane. It is more of a second, third item to me, Experimental Hexplate. But I'm sure some champions might justify to buy it as a first item if their all-in is really strong. Obviously, if you look at itemization as a whole, you could think, well, is there actually a better item I could rush on Nocturne compared to this? Is there something that gives me what I want that this item doesn't? For example, on Nocturne you want items that focus on auto-attacking, like for example Blade of Ruin King. But Blade of Ruin King has no HP and it has no CDR for your ultimate. So you might not want to rush it, or who knows, it might be the best option. And you don't want to buy a Hydra item because they're really expensive and you already have wave clear. And you don't want to buy a Shin item because your cooldowns are really long and your base AD is bad. So you might just be forced to buy this item. And considering it has Moonquiver build pet, it might not be that bad. Now, Sundered Sky is very interesting because they pretty much removed Sunderer, which they apparently didn't really like that much, healing every 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds as Jax. It's more like 2 seconds cooldown. You don't really use the 1.5 exactly. It's also slightly bugged because of the tick server. It's probably going to be like 1.6 in most cases. You'll see that even if you time your Shin perfectly, sometimes it's just not going to go off. You can just test that. So it was more like a 2 seconds cooldown, and yes, it was pretty gross healing. It made certain champions unbearable. It was a mythic, so Sunderer had to be viable in some sense. But they decided to make an item that is similar to Sunderer and more about team fighting, where you have a per target cooldown similar to Heartsteel, or more similarly Udyr's E. It's just a 6 seconds per target cooldown, which they don't even mention here. It doesn't say it's 6 seconds. Everything else is alright. It has Tunneler, which we'll read about in a second. Coffin Warhammer, really nice build pet overall, and pretty nice stats, good amount of AD, really haste. So it's similar to Gorinker because you're going to be able to heal off a lot of targets around you in quick succession if you just switch targets, auto-attacking everyone in order to trigger this effect. And similar to Thunderer, because, well, it's on-hit healing, but it has way higher cooldown and it's not dependent on you casting abilities or having spammable spells, so it's just more well-rounded and balanced, and it has a good contrast with the other fighter mythics, as in, you go Shojin for DPS, you go Trinity for DPS, you go Blackbeard for DPS, but a lot of fighters might want something for sustain if they just want to be a better frontliner, or they are looking to become really unkillable against a low damage comp, for example. Maybe they have enchanters or something. So I think there is very nice room in the fighter item system to have a sustain item like this. And I think Thunder Sky is a healthier version of Goredrinker or Thunderer. I like this item. We'll see how it ends up landing. Now we have Tunneler, which is simply AD and HP. That's it. It's a bit gold efficient, that's the purpose of it. Longsword Ruby Crystal. So, as you can see here, for 350 gold, you are getting 5 AD and 100 life. Which ends up being, maybe like 1200 gold value. So it's nice to buy a lot of champions, kind of like early health. Definitely decent, especially if you are running out of slots when you are building some late game, mid game items. It's not bad. On the other hand, we have Steel Sigil, which is also supposed to just be slot efficient, because this item on the other hand is not very gold efficient. It builds it to GA and Distance. In order for it to be gold efficient, from what I looked at, it had to have 5 more armor, and then it would actually be a solid component. But what we are looking at here is, when you build GA or Distance, you're probably gonna have only a few slots left, right? 2, for the most part, you're gonna have 2 slots left. So one of them you could fill with Steel Sigil. If you have only 1 slot left, then it's even better. It's just gonna make it easier to buy these items. What I'm saying is, you'd rather have Steel Sigil than a Chain Vest when you base with like 2k gold and you are building to this item, right? So that's why Steel Sigil is pretty nice in the build path of these items, because they are more late game items, mid game-ish in some situations, but even then it's going to be nicer to build this. So Wit's End, I kind of hate that they had so much time to prepare for this and there's no context. They could have given some explanations. For example, on Wit's End, why did they make it into a bruiser item again? More of a fighter item. Wit's End on live is quite offensive and for the most part a marksman item. This is more of a fighter item, and now it has a lot more attack speed, more MR, no AD, and tenacity. So yeah, you can skip mercs in some situations, or a tenacity rune, because you will know that this is a good game for Wit's End. And all that we really care about is this passive, where you get magic damage on hit. This is where the damage comes from. If you play an auto attacker, this item is overall going to be amazing, especially because it's so much cheaper for Warwick, Jax, Trundle. They're going to love this, because not only it has more MR, more tenacity, more attack speed to synergize with the on hit. The champions don't really have the craziest AD ratios anyway. It's also a lot cheaper, just easy to introduce it into your build without feeling too bad. It's easier for it to compete with actual magic resist items like Spirit Visage and Force of Nature, Maw by Mortius. And it does a lot more damage than Maw by Mortius, even though you don't get the shield, on top of having tenacity. Now, I think I still prefer the older version in Season 10, where you would actually get healing below 50% of your HP based on the damage dealt, but it was a pretty small amount of healing because it was post-mitigation, so since you have no magic pen, the healing ended up being quite low as well. But probably still better than having tenacity. 20% is not that much. Overall, Witsend is solid. I wouldn't say it's necessarily buffed or nerfed, it's just a solid item. Now Trinity Force, it didn't really change that much except the build path that I'll mention in a second. The only thing is that they removed the Threefold Strikes passive, which was a lot of damage. The Trinity Force was very strong and it was a mythic. Now it's a legendary, they removed some power. Though they gave it 5 AD, to be fair, 5 AD is quite a lot, kind of makes up a bit for losing that passive. And now it has a pretty strong build path as well. You have Sheen, Phage, Hardbound Axe. As I said, Hardbound Axe is a pretty good component, Phage also. Kindle Gem was a pretty stale component when building Trinity Force, like kind of lame. And now Sheen is also slightly buffed in some cases, in others it's going to be quite nerfed. But we'll see. Trinity Force is probably just going to be one of the best items this season 14. It might even end up getting nerfed depending on what happens with the system. They might even nerf it on range. At the end of the day, who even knows? There are a lot of powerful items. It's not season 10. And Trinity Force was pretty strong in season 10 as well, though it was objectively worse. It was much more expensive with a little bit worse stats in some way, I believe. But we'll see. Anyways, Black Cleaver, if you guys don't know, was overpowered on purpose. So now they are nerfing Black Cleaver a little bit, but not by much. They are increasing the AD, lowering the haste, buffing the movement speed, and nerfing the percentage armor pen. Black Cleaver overall is still going to be a very solid item for a bunch of champions that can stack it fast, and they are not good at using Shojin or Trinity Force. Like if you're a champion that is better at using Shin procs, or is bad at using the stacking spell damage, then you probably should look to buy Black Cleaver. For example, Urgot is pretty bad, I mean terrible with Shojin and pretty bad with Trinity Force, so you're gonna look to buy Black Cleaver. That's just one random example off the top of my head. Size Gauge, gain tenacity as a passive, which is very nice. I kept talking about this and I've been asking Riot for a very long time in maybe different Twitter comments, maybe on stream, or just mentioning it a couple times, yeah, that we should have some other items with tenacity. And now we have Strax Gauge and Witsend, and it's on a proper set of items, because of course fighters should be the characters that care the most about tenacity. Tanks don't really care about tenacity because they're extremely tanky and they just want to use their spells, and if you CC a tank it doesn't matter that much, and other classes obviously they don't really want to get CC'd. Fighters are in the middle. If they get CC'd they can't really function because they need to be there, auto tech. Usually they have some form of sustain that comes from being really close and auto-taking. So it's amazing to have tenacity on Sterak. Plus having the tenacity when the shield triggered was just terrible, because you're just below HP, the CCs are all on cooldown, who cares? I like this, and it makes building and planning your build a bit easier. You can skip Mercury Treads in some cases and not be completely useless against a hard CC as a fighter. Tank and supporting items. Oh my god guys, this is almost gonna get over 2 hours I suppose. No, it's definitely gonna be over 2 hours. Hey, I hope you are gonna enjoy this content. I'm really going deep here. Hollow Radiance. Another thing that I've been asking for. We've been talking about this for more than a year. Hollow Radiance, Bummy Cinder, magic resist item. This is mostly a laning item, because you'll see it's not too special. So Bummy Cinder and Spectre Scowl, these are two of the best tank components that exist. Probably the two best tank components along with Verdant's mail, I guess. One grants you damage and wave clear, while also coming with good stats, and the other is just extremely good against mages. So if you need both Bummies and Spectre Skull in the laning phase, this is just the item to go. It's gonna be slot efficient. And even though it has a pretty low amount of magic resist, it does have 600 life, which scales very well with certain kits, you know, that have the inbuilt HP ratios like say Zhonya or Zac. Now it does have a pretty weak version of Sunfire here, and the benefit of completing this item is Desolate. I love that word. Killing an enemy, non-word, non-structure, deals magic damage in an area around them. The magic damage is equal to 2 ticks, so it's still pretty low. Don't think this is gonna be a lot of damage. It's just so skewed towards a laning item, because this is one of the most useless passives if you think about it, right guys? You have to kill a target, so you have to be fighting someone in a lane, and as you kill minions with your AoE spells, you are gonna deal some extra damage. That's about it. But what is it gonna do in teamfights? This is really such a laning skewed item, to the point of which you might just go Bummies, right? Spectre Scowl, and then be like, why would I upgrade to Hollow Radiance? I can just turn my Spectre Scowl into Spirit Visage or a Kenny Rooker that we are gonna get to in a second. So I think Riot really fucked up with Hollow Radiance. They should actually give it a useless passive like this so people can't buy it, right? Yeah, please give it something useful, man. I don't know. Unending Despair. This is essentially similar to Jackshaw. After 7 seconds you're going to deal a little bit of damage and heal. Chainvest Kindle Gem Ruby Crystal, a reasonable price, a decent amount of stats. And by the way, we tested this healing, it's based on how many targets you hit. So the way I see Unending Despair is if you can be close to a bunch of enemy champions constantly, then that's the best time to buy it. Especially against tanks and fighters, because you're just gonna get a lot more healing that way. The range is quite limited, and if you only hit 1 target, it's quite terrible. If you hit 2 targets, it's okay-ish, but the most value is around 3 targets if you can just take that kind of sustained fight. Apparently it also works with Ingenious Hunter. You're gonna reduce a few of the seconds, 33% of this to be exact, which is gonna be 2.5 seconds or something, almost. Nothing too crazy anyway. Well, yeah, the damage is very low on it. It's almost like it doesn't exist for the most part, though it resembles Sunfire a bit, as in, well, it's gonna deal similar damage to Hollow Radiance, unironically. Something close. I already told you a situation in which you should build Unending Despair, but on top of that, I think now with Unending Despair being in the game, we have an armor item that makes a bit more sense against casters, assassins and stuff like that, compared to the other armor items. Because what are the other armor items? Thornmail, Frozen Heart, and Rending. They are all anti-auto tech, but Unending Despair is a bit more anti-spells. So I think it could really fill that niche. Maybe I didn't exactly intend that with this item, but it can fill that kind of niche. Of course, you also have Sapphire, but I'm not talking about Sapphire because that's the offensive item. I'm talking about an item that helps with defense. Kenny Rooker, which might be a highlight for this patch for a lot of people. You have Spectre Skull, Negatron Cloak, which makes mages pretty weak against a lot of tanks in lane, obviously, and it has okay amount of health. 400 is like the bare minimum, I would say. If it's lower than that, it's just way too little health. A lot of magic resist and 150 base regen, nothing else like CDR or whatever. Almost 3k gold, and Mega Bane, which And then I up not nerfing, even though a lot of people think it's OP. So it's a Galio shield for 20% max health. It's just Galio passive, it looks purple on your HP bar. And this is gonna be amazing at countering burst mages, especially champions that are looking to build the Stormsurge item, which could be a little bit meta defining, who knows even. They did nerf it slightly by a 2 magic penetration, by the way. Yeah, Kenny Rooker is gonna be amazing for tanks against mages, but at the end of the day you're still going to be having a pretty strong mage, and the tank might not be able to balance it out just by being annoying in lane. And let me tell you something, guys, you don't really need Kenny Rooker to be strong as a tank in lane. Usually the laning phase ends by the time you buy this item in some instances, but you are already strong as a tank in lane once you have D-Shield plus Spectre Skull. You don't really need Kenny Rooker to achieve that. So don't be memed by Cyan mid with Kenny Rooker, because you'll still be able to clear the minions and ignore him and be useful against his teammates. Doesn't really matter that he's getting this value, and if you have enough physical damage on this team, you are gonna be fine. Besides that, what a lot of people might have not noticed this season, after they nerfed a lot of the magic resistant itemization, they buffed mages in different ways, it ended up not mattering anymore if you have a full AP team, which used to be quite bad in the past. On live servers in season 13, full AP teams don't really have much of an issue unless they get too late game into specific champions, because the mana itemizations isn't that strong. So Kenny Rooker punishes you having multiple mages and stuff like that, or just burst oriented champions with magic, which I like. And as I mentioned before, maybe you just skipped through the video, tanks are supposed to counter mages. We needed to buff MR itemization if we give mages a lot of power, and we also ended up seeing that mages got a lot of power, especially against squishy targets. So at least against tanks they should be a little bit weaker to balance these things around and give tanks a purpose in League of Legends. Because to be fair, I mean, not like I'm a huge fan of tanks, I actually hate playing tanks, but like I like playing Juggernauts. They might look like tanks, but I'm actually playing the champion because I want to carry the game myself. I want to deal a crazy amount of DPS. I want to have the highest amount of damage on the graph at the end of the game. And I would build as many damage items as I can if it would be effective. That's just how certain characters work. They might rely on base damage, especially Juggernauts, that I like playing because I like these characters that they have a defined weakness, but they can deal and take a lot of damage. That's just how I like to play League of Legends and take over games. I think I lost my train of thought a bit here. It's been almost 2 hours. But anyways, tanks don't really have a place in season 13. They are pretty much the worst class, except for the ones in support role. Yeah, they definitely need to be a bit more useful, like at least counter mages a little bit. Come on. Heartsteel. It doesn't have ability haste anymore. Giant's Belt, Crystal Embrace, Ruby Crystal. So it's just the same item except it's cheaper and it does have ability haste, and for the most part I think it does around the same damage and grants around the same health. Still 30-second cooldown per target. I think it's pretty similar. Yeah, Heartsteel is gonna be decent. I mean, it's still gonna fill the same purpose if you have a champion that well, let's just say that Heartsteel should be good if you play against champions that don't have easy access to max health and relatively low damage comp, maybe some squishy characters, ideally, which you can burst with a Heartsteel passive. It has to be a combination of things. And some champions are gonna like it by default because they have high HP ratios, such as Cyan or, you know, Pumpkin. Yeah, those are some options. Heartsteel is a decent item. Definitely not a bad idea to buy it a lot of characters, and it received a huge buff. Not because they removed Liandry's Anguish, now you have Liandry's Torment as a legendary. Mages that don't just have that free access, I can just build Liandry's Anguish every game, do whatever I want, doesn't matter, if you have to be squishy, you just go Liandry's anyway and completely ruin your character that builds Heartsteel. Now I actually have to invest into Liandry's Torment as my second or third item, which might not be the ideal case scenario, and it's not gonna be as effective at killing tanks because it doesn't have that amplification of 12% extra damage. So all in all, Heartsteel gets buffed anyways, because that was the biggest source of max health damage, since a lot of champions can't just buy a Blade of the Ruined King, obviously. Like, you can't just go Blade of the Ruined King Darius or Garen. But you could go Liandry's Anguish on every mage, which made Heartsteel champs a little useless. I like talking about these things, guys. Hope you are enjoying this video, as we are diving deep into 2 hours. Holy I don't know who made it this far. Maybe on double speed. This is a freak type video length. We are turbo chilling in freak low. Trailblazer, formerly known as Speed with Friends. Yeah, thank you, right? Speed with Friends. I don't know where the hell we've seen that item before, because it was never in League of Legends. Wing Moonplate, terrible component that should get buffed. Plus Chain Vest. 450 health, 40 armor, 5% bonus movement speed. I don't know, the stats are okay, nothing too crazy for this price. It's a little bit gold inefficient. One moving build up to 20 bonus movement speed, so it's a weaker version of Deadman's Plate when it comes to that. At maximum steps, leave a trail that raises allied champions' move speed by 15% of your movement speed. So that can give them around 20% movement speed if you have a lot of movement speed. This also depends. Do you have Shurelia? Do you have Rakan ult on? Are you slowed and stuff like that? Because I assume if you're slowed, then you also give less MS to your teammates that aren't slowed, which actually grants it some counterplay. If you get heavily slowed, you are not gonna give your teammates movement speed. I like to think about these details, it's fun. Your next attack discharges build up move speed for melee champions at top speed. The attack also slows the target by 50% for 1 second. So they have the Deadman's Plate slow on this item now. It's pretty similar concept. Pretty self-explanatory item. You are only going to buy this on champions looking to engage, if engaging is very important. And you don't have to necessarily buy it on a support champion, but obviously it's going to be best on support champions because it doesn't even give the best stats. It's quite team oriented. Though you shouldn't be afraid of buying it on some other characters as well, and I think it gives a bit more room to certain champions. There's not a lot that is popping up in my mind, but let's say that you guys really have to engage on some long-range champions, maybe Jinx on the backline, and your team has pretty garbage engage. You might be able to buy this, let's say, on a volley bear that normally isn't looking to just engage and dive the backline. That's how I see it. Whenever I play volley bear, I love more like front to back. You just get to constantly heal on a frontliner and stack your passive and whatever. maybe a Conqueror or a Little Temple. But it might be something that closes the gap in a team comp where it allows you to engage on a Jinx, like I said. I really wonder, could you actually justify this on Udyr, the way Udyr plays fights? Maybe you could. Technically you could if, like I said, it's imperative for you and your team to just go in, engage, explode on the enemy team. Anyways, Ziggs Convergence. When you cast your ultimate, get an Ice Storm around yourself for 5 seconds. The storm deals 50 magic damage per second and slows enemies inside for 30%. To be fair, it should say gain a Frostfire Storm. Wasn't it decided so it's supposed to be fire and ice? Even the icon is fire and ice. And it's called Ziggs Convergence. Where's the convergence? Gain a Frostfire Storm. Really right. You are messing up your own lore here. 50 magic damage per second and 30% slow. So you just kind of have Iceborne plus Sapphire combined in one item when you press your ult, Kindle Gem Glacial Shroud. It's definitely a pretty nice item for certain champions. This is really good on Alistar, because you're going to be on top of enemy team and now you slow them for a long time and you deal some extra damage. Obviously it's only going to be 250 damage per target, but it's still a good amount. It's also a really cheap item. I think this convergence is going to be really good, man, even as a rush for this type of champions, because why not? Armor, mana, HP, haste. Yeah, pretty solid. Just have to pick the right champion to use it, even rel. Locket of the Iron Solari. It's just Locket, not much to say. Doesn't give armor and mana anymore because it's not a mythic. You can buy it whenever you want, on any champion you want. You can buy Locket on your AD carry, it doesn't even matter. Yeah, it's just Locket. Good item. Baits noobs into dying, denies assassins. Good old Locket. Warmog's armor. I really like what they've done with Warmog. You're basically getting something that synergizes well with the identity of the item. The problem is that I think they went a bit too far. They made it even more expensive when it was already a pretty expensive tank item. 3100 for a tank item is already really expensive. Then it has less health and no ability haste anymore. So you are losing those stats while it's more expensive for move speed. So when the passive triggers, where you gain health regen, you also gain movement speed. And I could see the niche of this item. You get 15% movement speed, basically the same as Deadman's Plate. Deadman's Plate gives you 40 flat, which is almost always going to be 10% movement speed on the other hand. So it's a Deadman's Plate that fills your HP bar up. And I could see this working, especially in a character like Udyr. You are just going to run around the map with high movement speed, regenerating your HP, just go top lane, farm top lane, go mid lane, farm mid lane. Some noobs are trying to bother you, they get off of your HP bar, you go bot lane with high movement speed again, you regenerate HP, something like that, just to do it for fun gameplay, especially if you are fed and they have a low peak potential comp, as in it's not gonna be possible for them to lock you down. You can just, even if they get in range to hit you, you can still disengage the fight. So like a low CC, maybe low mobility comp, which is kind of rare. But sometimes, yeah, it can be hard for certain comps to kill Udyr or Trundle or Singe running around with an item like this. That's kind of how I see it, but it's still very niche. It has more of a purpose now. You can justify Warmog armor a bit more as a snowball tank item. The way I see this is a snowball not even tank item, like a snowball juggernaut item where you just run around the map and you're being super annoying. You kind of become like a Garen when you buy this item. You're just kind of like a Garen with phase rush. You run around the map, fight noobs, move to another lane even, regen your health with your passive backup. Yeah, you just become Garen with this item, and I don't know what to say. It's a lot to talk about, a lot of scenarios and thoughts are going through my head right now. I just think it's interesting. But they probably went a bit too far. When they make an item like this, Riot should be a little bit more open. They are really stupid, because when they nerf the stats on this item a lot like this, they just make the item not be attractive, so it will probably be considered a bad item, especially when people look that, hey, it's more expensive, the stats are shittier, they'll just not want to build this item. It's better to make people buy the item and then nerf it slightly after it becomes more popular. But anyways, that's just how I see balancing. Jaksho the Protean. They only kept the resist increase part, so after 5 seconds you gain 30% of your bonus resist. Bonus resist, which means that the base armor, the base MR, it doesn't count. So it has less health, more armor, more MR. The build pet is Chain Vest Negat from Ruby Crystal, and no ability haste. And I understand what they have done to this. They have basically made a scaling tank item, sort of to replace Gargoyle, which they removed. And I understand why they removed it. If they wanted to keep Jaksho, they basically decided, hey, we have Jaksho and Gargoyle. We have to remove one of them, because then they are both going to essentially be the same item, giving you late game scaling on tanks through resists. So they decided to keep Jaksho because they probably hate actives. And it's easier to appreciate this passive effect like this. That's what I would assume. When I'm looking at the item for the price, the stats are pretty low. I'm just thinking this item should have more stats. And yes, the passive can give you a lot of stats, but only if you have a lot of resist items. And then by the time you buy this, everyone is going to have percentage spend, which means that it's not even going to be that effective. Because at least Gargoyle, even if they got 10 million pen, even if they pressed Kog'Maw Q and Wukong Q with Jarvan Q combination on you, you would still press the shield and block, you know, a few random spells and auto attacks. Gargoyle's shield was pretty terrible in itself because it expired almost instantly, by the way. Just saying, you never get the full value, lol. But I think, I'm not saying you should necessarily make tanks scale well, because I don't think that tanks should scale too well. They're pretty strong early and mid game with some items against a lot of classes. And yeah, like tanks shouldn't be unkillable against any carries late game and stuff like that. But maybe the way to build Jaksho, to design Jaksho to be more precise, would be you should gain a percentage damage reduction based on your bonus resists. I think that would be more appropriate and linear. It wouldn't be broken, I would just give it a number that it wouldn't be broken, but it wouldn't fall off as hard as against penetration and, you know, resist reduction abilities and stuff like that. It's still gonna be a decent item, don't get me wrong, pretty solid in late game. Of course, by the way, my suggestion, I would make it have a cap so that you can't just abuse it on Malphite and Ramos. And anyways, those champions wouldn't like this item too much, unfortunately, because it wouldn't boost their ratios, because you'd get damage reduction, not flat armor. So Deadman's Plate lost the slow, by the way, if it's not obvious here, if you don't want to read this wall of text, and gained 30% slow resist. makes this item a bit more interesting, and I think the MS Plate was already a good item. It's just niche and people don't know how to buy it, when to buy it, and what it does. They don't understand that the MS Plate is basically a damage item, offense item. The MS does a lot of damage, you just have to look into it, do a little bit of testing, and I realize it basically does as much damage as an AD item in some situations, if you count how much DPS it can deal every other auto attack, because even if you move a few pixels in game between each auto attack, you're going to gather a few charges, which converts into essentially all hit damage, on top of the initial burst, of course. Renu's Omen lost a little bit of armor, but was made into a more specific item. And now with Unending Despair joining the field, you're probably gonna build Unending Despair over Renu's Omen if you need those kind of stats, but you don't care about crit damage. While on live server, you don't have that many options. You might sometimes even build Randuin against 0 crit. If you play, let's say, Shivana, you might build Randuin just because of the stats and the slow, right? But now it's a bit... the options are a bit more wide open. And yeah, I like this. It's gonna scale better against crit champs. And also, a lot of classes lost power, and you'll see that Marksman Atomization didn't lose much power in this new system. Force of Nature. Well, Force of Nature simply doesn't stack with CCs anymore, does it? I think it was just a tooltip mistake on PB. Apparently it still works with CCs, which is great. And it stacks a bit faster than live. Force of Nature definitely needed to be brought back. They essentially killed Force of Nature as a band-aid, because they were probably already thinking that they're gonna make these changes to Mage itemization. If you ever listen to what Riot was saying, they said for a very long time that they're planning to change Mage itemization a lot. So they band-aid nerfed Force of Nature to the ground, and now they brought it back. It doesn't have percentage damage reduction, but it does have a lot of magic resist, which is essentially the same thing. It's just not gonna be as effective in some situations. I wonder what the math is, how much damage reduction you're getting from having the 70 magic resist. It lost 5 MR, doesn't matter. Build path is the same. It stacks a bit faster. Force of Nature is gonna be pretty nice once again, especially as a mobility item. Now let's have a look at Iceborne Gauntlet. A lot cheaper. It's not a meeting anymore. Chain Vest. Ruby and Sheen is the new build pad. Health and ability haste reduced. Pretty alright if you look at the cost reduction. This is a pretty big wall of text, but let's just jump to the arrow in the middle. After using an ability, your next attack is enhanced with additional 100 base attack damage, physical damage, and creates a frost field for 2 seconds. The old frost field was 2.5 seconds, allegedly. Enemies that move across the field are slowed by 20% plus 4% per 100 health. For range, the slow is very small. So if you look at the initial Iceborne Gauntlet from when it was a meeting in Season 13, you have this 15% slow that scales with HP, but it gets doubled on the primary target. You can see here your primary target is slowed for double the amount, and the damage reduced by 10%. Now since it's a legendary, the slow is much smaller. You can almost get up to a realized crystal scepter. And Iceborne Gauntlet, the slow was very overpowered, and a lot of people were complaining about it. It was not a fun item to play against. Made certain champions have like really boring and fucked up interactions, especially Illaoi. You can't avoid the tentacles or her E, you just get slowed by 50%. What can you even do? Now the slow is more reasonable. I like that the item is very cheap. It has health, ability haste, armor. That's what you need on Iceborne Gauntlet. If you compare it to old Iceborne, bro, old Iceborne was so terrible. It had mana for most of its gold value, no HP, it was expensive. This is a really sexy version of Iceborne Gauntlet that is gonna be quite nice on a bunch of champions. Winter's Approach got a fat, massive buff. You guys remember when I was saying that Riot shouldn't have nerfed this item, they just randomly decided to nerf this item out of nowhere. Like Gragas and Ornn were building it a bit here and there, some people were even saying that it's not really effective. And they nerfed it, then they ended up reverting the nerf, even making it slightly stronger. I think with the mana cost, it had a mana cost, and I think they removed it so it doesn't even consume your mana anymore. So they made it stronger than before, and people are still not building it on live. And I think this item is very powerful in its own, it's just really underrated and hard to justify. For example, like I could buy it on Udi Jungle, but how am I gonna fit Dark Seal with Tear, still get to my power spikes in time before I lose this game? You know, it's more buildable as a laner. But this is a massive buff to the item, it's just unreal cheap now. Thimble Winter just looks a little OP to me at this point, it's just a lot cheaper. So you can definitely find some angles for it if your champion likes buying Tear, if it's more of a free laning phase on Ornn, Gragas, okay, some decks. Yeah. There really aren't a lot of champions that can buy this though. Sunfire Aegis does 3 less damage per tick. That's it, that's the change. Yeah, it does 3 less damage per tick. They could just say it does 3 less damage per tick, right? Anyways, it also lost 50 health. And I understand these changes because Sunfire Aegis is a pretty strong legendary and a lot of champions are gonna look to buy this now. And maybe it's not necessary to nerf it, they're just doing it preemptively. If it has a bad win rate, I guess they're gonna buff it. That's it. Now it doesn't have regen anymore. Now it has more armor and less HP. Okay. Who cares? At least it doesn't have a garbage build pet anymore. Now it has Kindle Gem and Chain Vest, which is quite good. Nice Vow, still one of the best items in the game. They still decided to fully go through with their Frozen Heart change, where they want to make Frozen Heart support tier level cheap. So a lot of supports can comfortably buy Frozen Heart now as their main armor item. You could say, well, their main armor item is Nice Vow, but this is not like anti-auto-tech armor item, physical, whatever. It's just like, you don't buy Nice Vow for the armor, you buy Nice Vow for the passive. But the Frozen Heart, you buy Frozen Heart for the armor to counter physical champions, right? So I guess that's what they want on supports. And on top of that, a lot of items compared to mythics, the legendaries are cheaper. For example, you're gonna rush a Black Cleaver or a Shojin. Well, allegedly Shojin is 3300 gold, so I might be wrong on this, but maybe rush Eclipse or Kraken Slayer. Not a 3300 gold item like Divine Sunderer or Gorniker. Although there are still pretty expensive items, potentially Shojin if the information is correct there, Trinity Force, Hydra items, Kraken Slayer is the same as Life, so maybe that's not the best example. Blade Runner Kick is still expensive. So all in all, I don't really get why they buff Frozen Heart so hard. I think a 2500 gold, if they want to buff it, would be more appropriate. It's probably gonna get nerfed to that eventually. But hey, if Riot wants to have some fun with Frozen Heart, then sure, have fun, right? It's definitely overpowered though. Voltaic Cyclosword. Damn guys, I didn't expect to get into 3 hours. Let's try to focus on talking properly here. The Brutalizer, Kirch's Shard. Yes, the Brutalizer is back into the game. Voltaic Cyclosword. This is a lethality Stormrazer type item. It's essentially lethality Stormrazer. So you have lethality and ability haste instead of crit and attack speed. And instead of movement speed, you have a slow. And instead of magic damage, it's physical damage, which gets amplified by lethality. You see the trend here. It's essentially the same item with different stats. A different nuance. Moving and attack will generate energized attack. Dashes and stealth stack energized 75% faster. So from what I noticed, let's assume that it's not exactly this number. But let's assume that an auto attack will give you 10 stacks on your energized effect, which stacks to 100 by the way. You should know that if you play League of Legends. I think that means that dashing is gonna give you 17.5, or either that or it's based on the distance traveled. So while you are traveling a certain distance, let's say you get 10 stacks per 300 units, now you're gonna get 17.5 stacks per 300 units. It's probably something like that, well, while you are in stealth or when you are dashing. So it's actually not that big of a deal. It's weird to say when you're going to build this item. So one thing that might be interesting is, yes, you can use this on certain marksmen such as Ezreal, for example, to apply this effect. It also has a 20% slow for ranged champions. And you'll like ability haste, just having a bit more DPS with this sort of sheen type effect, right? But I don't know what kind of assassins would buy this. It's more of a DPS item. And of course, you could think Zed can apply the 99% slow, makes it easy for him to land the shurikens, that's completely fine. But other than that, it's hard to justify this item. And just because you play something like Rengar, doesn't mean you should necessarily build this item, because there can be better items for Rengar. Like Rengar doesn't necessarily need the 99% slow. Although, you know, you could build this on Rengar, because the 99% slow is still decent. But it's not a lot of damage. It's not like you're building Prowler's Claw. And here's what they removed: Duskblade of Drakar and Prowler's Claw, just to be precise. And lethality has been adjusted to be 1 armor penetration per 1 point of lethality, rather than 0.6 to 1 armor penetration per lethality based on level. So they just reverted the lethality change. They reverted lethality, now it's armor penetration again, but they kept the name because, to be fair, lethality is a cool word. And they don't want people to get confused now, so they should keep it as lethality. Let's actually read this, because I'm curious what is the thought process behind assassin item changes. In previous season, AD assassins tended to purchase 1 or 2 lethality items before pivoting into other options in the AD system, particularly fighter items. We believe assassins are their best when they are highly lethal but highly fragile anti-carry, and when they have fighter builds they tend to not be satisfying their own fantasies, on top of being more frustrating and harder to deal with for enemies. Our goals with these changes are to remove some of the more potent defensive tools assassins were accessing, like Duskblade or Eclipse, and open them up to stronger stumbling through the assassin system with the lethality purchases. We've also removed their ability to stack Black Cleaver and Last Whisper items so that assassins don't end up as premium killers of bruisers and reasonably effective against tanks, as we believe armor should be an effective purchase into assassins. perfect. This is exactly what assassins needed. They shouldn't have a lot of random tankiness. They shouldn't become bruisers. For the most part, yes, it's nice for them to have more options and have the opportunity, the opportunity to go Black Cleaver, Edge of Night, Eclipse and stuff like that, but not do it in a really obnoxious way where they still kill tanks, bruisers, they just kill anything. Assassins in late game nowadays can kill anything. A Z can 1v1 a tank for fun in late game nowadays. And ironically, that's the reality of the situation. I've been killed through Gargoyle and Sterak and armor items by late game Z multiple times. In pure 1v1. And or you get slow by Serila and you can't even dodge much, so that's the best part about it. So in my mind, lethality items should be focused around assassination and snowballing with different nuances, and they should also be relatively cheap because the champions want to snowball, they want cheap items, they want to accelerate, they are playing a mini game, okay? Otherwise they have no purpose. And they should be hit or miss, yes, sometimes assassins should be piece useless. That's how the game works. And they shouldn't play to scale. They shouldn't play to get Ravenous Hydra on Z and just farm minions and be 0-2-0, then randomly carry in late game if you give them the chance. But that's how a lot of champions that are playing anyway. Let's move to Profane Hydra. So it's Tiamat Brutalizer. Haste, lethality, attack, damage. Good. Nice. This is what a lot of assassins need. You play Rengar, enjoy your Tiamat into getting an actually useful item for your character. Good. Nice. Thumbs up. I like that they made another Hydra. Good job, right? Hubris. 60 AD, 18 lethality, 15 ability haste. When you kill an enemy champion, you're gonna get a statue of yourself. If you already have a statue, this statue upgrades. Passive. Eminence. When a champion that you have damaged within the last 3 seconds dies, gain 10 plus 1 per rank of statue attack damage for 60 seconds. I thought you have to score the kill yourself. Now, damage within 3 seconds. Serrated Dark Coffil Zorhammer. Well, what I can say is that this item is really good when you are ahead, really good when you are snowballing, and really good when everything is easy to kill. As in, you have a lot of targets, they don't have much counterplay against your assassination. I think that's a perfect time to buy this item. Because you're going to have this passive up constantly. And especially if you are fed and people are dying left and right to your damage, squishy characters, whatever, then you might be able to have a pretty permanent uptime on this 60 seconds buff, which ends up making it a decent item. But nothing too crazy unless you get 10 plus statues. It only starts being a decent item at around 5 statues, but it does give decent stats for 3k gold. So overall, I thought this item is going to be more hit or miss, but looking at it, it can be somewhat consistent. It's just dependent on the champion and the game. Then we have Opportunity, which is very cheap, indicating to me that it might be a decent rush, which I like in the assassin item system. All of the items should be pretty cheap ideally. Serrated Dark plus Rekfix, which is right here, we'll have a look at it in a second. 55 AD, 18 lethality, 6% movement speed. Simple, no bullshit abilities, you just want to kill some noobs. Damage. Passive, Preparation. After being out of combat with champions for 8 seconds, gain 5 to 10 lethality based on level. This lethality lasts for 3 seconds after dealing damage to champions. Extraction. If a champion dies within 3 seconds of damaging them, gain 150 decaying movement speed for 1.5 seconds. This item is just gain lethality for burst kill a noob, then go out with a lot of movement speed. So imagine you play Rengar. This champion doesn't have good ways to get out of a fight after assassinating someone. So this grants you a phase rush effect. You kill your target and run out. Very nice and well designed item. I like the idea. It's cheap, you can rush it, but you can also buy it as a second item because you'll see that there's an even better item to rush nowadays on Assassins. Opportunity is really cool, nice icon, I like this item. It just does the job. Damage, movement speed, go in, kill a noob, go out. Lovely. That's what I need in League of Legends. Requix. 20 AD, 40% movement speed. They just made an Ether Wisp. I'm just gonna call it the Blood Sperm or something, I don't know. Cool. It's just very weird that it doesn't have 5%. All the other movement speed items have 5%. This one has 4%. Oh, it's the lore. They wanted to be built on Jhin, so you can say 4 movement speed. Also, it's like a Zaya feather or something, or I don't know. Whatever, bro. Crazy Riot Games. The Brutalizer is back, it still has the lead price. Glowing Moat plus pickaxe. Dude, have we even seen the Glowing Moat in this whole list yet? I don't think we did. Do you guys even know what a Glowing Moat is? Anyway, it gives you 5 ability haste, it costs 250 gold. That's it, it's just ability haste component. We'll talk about it in a moment if we find it in this list. It might be in enchanter items or I guess enchanter items maybe. Who knows where Riot placed it. It's a very weird list in general. They should have like kind of started with some component items. But hey, this is just a different version of Dirk, kinda. It has AD, ability haste and lethality, and it builds into a few specific items. So far we have Profane Hydra and Voltaic Cyclosword as 2 of the items that build out of Brutalizer. And that is less opportunity cost. Why? Because Dirk is gonna be the superior item. Dirk is way better for assassins than Brutalizer. So that means that Profane Hydra and Voltaic Cyclosword are harder to build, and you might want to build them later into the game, not early, or they are gonna make you a little weaker in early because they don't have the power of Dirk. Although a Brutalizer, depending on what buys you have, isn't that bad either. It just comes with ability haste, which some champions care about, right? And like I said, since Voltaic Cyclosword is more of a DPS-ish item, you might not necessarily look to kill people in one rotation all the time when you build this item. It makes a bit more sense to have some ability haste Brutalizer component. I'm really trying to think about these things as much as possible. So it's a solid component, but nothing too crazy. Also, it doesn't have longswords in the build pad, so yes, pickaxe can be a great component, but it can also be a terrible component if you only have gold for longswords, right? Celida's Grudge. Brutalizer, Last Whisper. Again, same thing as I said before. Brutalizer is a bit of a heavier item, so to me it simply indicates that also Celida's Grudge should be more of a later game item, just like Profane Hydra. It makes sense. Riot is designing these items with a purpose. 45 attack damage, 15 lethality, 15 ability haste, gain 20 plus 11 of your lethality, armor penetration. Damaging ability slow enemies by 30% for 1 second. Now I gotta mention that on PBE this was damaging ability slow enemies by 30% for 1 second when they are below 50% life, so you can just build this on Ezreal and slow people for fun 24/7. I hope that's still in and they made yet another mistake in the patch notes. I'm really hoping that. Because either way, these should give a lot more pen for most of the game, even against tanks. it's a pretty buffed item. The build pad is also better. I don't know, Serial's Garage looks pretty strong, so it really wouldn't make sense if it slows at any HP value still. I'm pretty sure it's gonna come with that downside that the target has to be low for you to slow because it's an assassin item, and you shouldn't just get a random value on you know, Jace and Ezreal for building this, but and Varus, but hey, I don't know, it's Riot Games we're talking about here. I really hope it's a mistake in the patch notes. So anyways, Dirk got 100 gold cheaper, lost 5 AD, but keep in mind that now lethality is buffed. You get more armor penetration. So Dirk is really buffed. Especially because it's cheaper, it's gonna be a lot better, because sometimes you're just not gonna have 1100 gold to purchase it, right? And that happens quite a lot for assassins, because they might not have the best laning phase in the first few levels into a lot of matchups, right? So therefore, it makes it easier for assassins to buy this item and snowball their early game. Dirk looks quite strong anyway. Yumo's Ghostblade got cheaper, lost the ability haste. Other than that, doesn't have that little lethality passive. It has been moved to opportunity, as you've seen before. Dirk and Rectrix, just like opportunity, same build pad, same price. So you have kind of two options if you want to look for assassinations and roaming: Yumo's Ghostblade or not Rectrix, sorry, opportunity. They deal similar damage and they both have movement speed mechanics. Yumo's Ghostblade is better at roaming around the map and getting on the target. Opportunity has slightly more damage and is better at getting out of a fight. So Yumo's is for getting in, Opportunity is for getting out. Interesting niche here. And Yumo's Ghostblade is going to be by far the strongest lethality item because it has everything you need in this item for a cheap price. It's a perfect item to kill noobs. 60 AD, 18 lethality, movement speed out of combat, and movement speed on the active still. 20% for 6 seconds. Everything you need, literally, just everything you need to kill noobs. Yumo's Ghostblade is even gonna be good, as I mentioned before in my last video. It's gonna be good even on something like Renekton or Riven, probably, in some cases. We'll see how the itemization ends up landing. Axiom Arch is still the same thing, except it's a Brutalizer Cofield's Warhammer. Again, Axiom Arc is something that you are probably looking to build later in the game when you stack some lethality items for dispersing to scale, you have some ability haste, your ulti cooldown is low, now you're looking to perhaps cast 2 ults in a team fight or snowball really hard on the map. This doesn't mean that you can't go Axiom Arc second item or third, right? I'm just saying that when you see Brutalizer in the build pad, it's already a bit more skewed towards later stages. And another thing that you can do on these Brutalizer items is, let's say you go Yumo's, but you want Axiom Arc as your second item. You can buy a Dirk, which is only 1k gold, then Brutalizer as you are building your Axiom Arc. So you keep the Dirk in your inventory, which does the job by itself, while you build into a Brutalizer item. And then it's not like you waste the Dirk, you're gonna follow up by upgrading the Dirk into, you know, let's say opportunity. Depending on which order you desire to buy the items, which you think is the most appropriate thing. But anyway, nothing changed on Axiom Arc except maybe something here. Let's have a look. I'm a little confused, so it's 0.4 per 1 lethality instead of 30% lethality. What does that even mean? So it's 40% instead of 30%? Right, games? It's not making much sense here. Let's see what they end up doing with Umbral Glaive. Did they actually nerf this item? Dark and Hofield's Warhammer. It has more lethality. And it's more expensive. Oh, they buffed it. You deal more damage to words now. I mean, that's not necessarily buff. Overall, the item is nerfed in my opinion because it was supposed to be like really cheap. But it still has the same purpose. I think they just made it a little too expensive. It still does the job. Umbral Glaive still has the same purpose. I feel like 2500 will be more appropriate though. Darken Pickaxe. Okay, all they did was make Serpent's Fang cheaper. Now that I don't really like because Serpent's Fang is potentially a really disgusting item. It just has that utility. I really like the older version of Serpent's Fang. If you guys remember when they released this item, it simply dealt bonus damage to shields that scale with AD. In this case, they could even make it deal bonus damage to shields that scales with lethality. And not only it had more potential, especially against squishies, it was just healthier. Because it's better for the assassin to be able to break more of the shield if he can deal more damage to a squishy target than for me to get it by like a random Kiana Q at max range and losing 50% of my shielding as a tank for a few seconds. Like Serpent's Fang should be just worse against bruisers, tanks and stuff like that use shield and better against squishy targets because you build Serpent's Fang to kill the AD carry that is getting shielded, not in order to kill the Scion. That's why I don't understand why this item isn't getting the effect reworked again. But hey, whatever. Marksman items. This is gonna get way over 3 hours, guys. I have no idea how I'm spending so much time talking about these things, but I hope you really appreciate the details. And if you made it this far, thank you, I guess. I don't know what to say. Terminus. So this item is quite interesting. It simply stacks pen, armor and magic pen percentage while giving you relatively small amount of armor and MR. 25 late game is still a lot, don't get me wrong, for your effective health as a carry. Recurve Bow, PF Sword Dagger. Huh, what an interesting build pad. There's not much to say about this item except that don't get baited to think that this is gonna be good on melees. It takes way too many attacks and melees rarely play for so many attacks right away. You can't even build this on Mastery, man. He doesn't want the pen or the resists, and he wants the burst damage to get the first reset. You can't build this on Tryndamere either. I wonder if you can build Terminus and LDR. I really assume you can't. I mean, you probably wouldn't want to do it anyway, but I really assume you can build, like, let's say, Terminus and Black Cleaver or something like that and just get some crazy pen. Yeah, I don't know. Like, this item definitely is pretty strong on paper and has a lot of potential, but just keep in mind that it takes 10 auto attacks to stack. So you have to play a champion like Kog'Maw or not even Varus, but yeah, Varus would be decent. Mostly something like Kog'Maw that can easily stack it with very high attack speed and a lot of attack speed items just quickly from a safe distance, and then you're gonna get high value. It depends on the comps and so on. I definitely think this item is a bit situational. If you don't play against tanks, it's really gonna be pointless until you reach late game. And I'm sure people are going to be like, what the fuck, this item looks so broken. But it's okay, I mean, it has 30 on hit, 30 attack speed, 40 AD. Those are good stats, not crazy. The passive is good before you think that takes 10 auto attacks to stack. That's just impossible to consistently do on a melee champion when you can just build a Blade of the Ruin King instead, even if you're trying to deal with a tank, like fucking Malphite or something. I mean, maybe that's the only way I could see this item viable on a melee champion. You want to beat Malphite inside. That could be the only explanation to build Terminus on a melee. Definitely marksman items. I mean, it clearly says marksman items here, so they have a goal with it. Rage Knife and Gale Force removed. Of course, they want to remove the active, otherwise it will make no sense in the system, because you could just get a dash every game on every AD carry. You could still get your damage items, unless the item would have really garbage stats, in which case it would just be a terrible item and impossible to balance. It can only be used similar to Crown of the Shattered Queen, as I said before. Guise's Rageblade. Hardbound Axe, Tome, and Longsword. As we said, Hardbound Axe is a pretty good component, so Guise's Rageblade can be decent as a first item. As a first item, judging by the build path. Stats are unchanged. Attacks deal 30 bonus magic damage on hit. You convert every blah blah blah. This was removed. Basic attacks grant 8% attack speed, staying up to 4 times for a maximum of 32% attack speed, while full stacks. Every third attack applies your own hit effects twice. So the change here is that attacks deal 30 bonus damage on hit, critical strike conversion removed. You can still crit with Guinsu, and it has the same stats, it's a bit cheaper. The reason why it's cheaper is because you're getting less value from the crit items, because they don't convert into on hit in order to multiply with the fact that you proc on hit effects more often, but overall that doesn't really matter that much, because crit damage is still going to be really efficient for DPS with high attack speed. I think it's mostly cheaper because it doesn't have the percentage pen scaling passive, and of course it's a legendary now. I mean, Guinsu's Rageblade just looks really solid in general. It's going to be one of the strongest items. It might even need a nerf, just because I think Kraken Slayer also looks pretty solid, but we'll see. Not necessarily. It does look balanced to some extent. So critical strike damage got nerfed by 5%, but Infinity Edge is cheaper. This makes sense, it's not meeting anymore. Same thing with Navori Quick Blade, it's a bit cheaper, but the passive is worse. It reduces less cooldown, and of course you also lost some AD. Pickaxe, Warhammer, Cloak of Agility instead of BF Sword. Okay, so they also made the build path worse in some cases, but overall, like, Pickaxe is not a bad component. And BF Sword is hard to build sometimes. GA is now BF Sword and Steel Sigil. As I said, Steel Sigil is an easy component to sit on when you don't have a lot of slots, and usually buy GA late, so that's good. It has more stats, which I also like. And J definitely needed a buff since they removed Stopwatch, and you were mostly buying J for Stopwatch, at least that's what a lot of people did, and J was honestly one of the worst items in the game by far by itself. And now it does restore 100% of your maximum mana after 4 seconds of status. Huh. Legally damage restore 5% of base health and 100% of maximum mana after 4 seconds of status. Okay. Interesting. You get all of your mana back. They really wanted to buff GA, huh? I mean, they did give it a relatively good amount of AD. It's more of a solid item. I can't just say that GA is so garbage anymore. Immortal Shield Ball got a bit more life still. Did they change the passive effect though? They buffed the shield. Oh, they removed the attack speed. Nice. The attack speed was quite useless. Not useless per se, but quite useless. Kind of pointless. Let's see what they changed to Kraken Slayer. Kraken Slayer interaction with Guise's Rageblade Phantom hits passive is being reintroduced. Well, that sucks. I'm very curious. This isn't good, my friends. All they did was buff Kraken Slayer. They just buffed Kraken Slayer. Why? Kraken Slayer was already a pretty solid item. Why did they have to buff it? No wonder they buffed Frozen Heart and Randuin the fuck. Anyway, LDR got a slight buff, but they also buffed armor items, so it's fine. Phantom Dancer is losing movement speed, thank god, from 14% now it's 10% because it doesn't give movement speed on passive. But it's stacking attack speed. I think it's weird for Phantom Dancer to stack attack speed considering Guise also stacks attack speed. But definitely Phantom Dancer has the niche of being a crit item with movement speed for auto attacks, and Guise is an on-hit item. Just a little weird to me that they both stack attack speed. Like, you don't need... I mean, it makes sense for PD in itself, because, yeah, you buy PD for a lot of auto-attacking in DPS. RFC simply gained 5% attack speed. It's just so random, you don't even really care about attack speed when you buy a Rapid Fire Cannon. If they really wanted to buff it, they should give it either like 1% movement speed or something like that, or 5 AD, and yeah, something like that. Static Shield. So did anything change on this item? Let's have a look. It hits less targets. That's it? It hits less targets? It doesn't have an AP ratio anymore as well. Huh, it just nerfed Static Shield. Okay. Stormsurge got buffed. Heavily buffed, I don't know why. You guys remember when I said that Stormsurge shouldn't get nerfed, they ended up nerfing it and then they buffed it back and now they buff it again? That's just a little confusing, man. Yeah, Collector got a buff as well. This is always a buff on every champion. Nice way to buff it, to be fair. And also keep in mind Lethality is more efficient now. So it's just like mega buffed. Collector is pretty decent for spellcasters, Samira, Misfortune, whatever, Graves. SS Silver got buffed. I can see why. Since it's gonna be a lot more of a staple in this kind of new system. With no mythics or whatever. I don't think it was necessary, but whatever, they just want to make it a bit more expensive. They did buff a bunch of other items, so who even cares? World Atlas, this is just a new support item. It has no specific stats, just general stats. So supports lost power early game. I guess a lot of players randomly were complaining that supports deal too much damage early and they shouldn't have so much agency in their like early game damage. And you can't really do that through champion skills, because okay, let's say that you nerf all the supports in their early game damage. So what? Then you just go and play Pantheon. You just go and play Darius support. You just go and play Yasuo support or something if you nerf the support's damage. So you can't do that through their kits. You have to do it through these items, so you don't have the little bit of AD and AP in early game. I guess that counts, but it's nothing too crazy. Then you have an upgrade, which is like you get words. at which point you get to the third upgrade, which simply spawns in your inventory or something. This item isn't actually something by itself. It simply allows you to upgrade into some of these specific support items. So here you are getting Celestial Opposition, which is for protection. Become blessed to reduce incoming champion damage by 35%, lingering for 2 seconds after taking damage from a champion. When the shield breaks, unleash a shockwave around you that slows nearby enemies by 50% for 1.5 seconds. Okay. Never mind, this is some sort of... You're basically trying to protect your teammate by being tankier and peeling with a slow, but it can also be a little bit used for engaging. Though it's... Yeah, it has options. It's definitely more of an engage item, I think. You're trying to go in, not die, and slow targets around you. It's kind of like an aftershock. I would like if the effect would be simply having a 20-second cooldown. Refreshes after leaving combat is a little annoying. Whereas if it was just 20 seconds cooldown or even 30 seconds cooldown, you can actually try to get it twice in another team fight. But hey. So long you're immobilizing an enemy champion grants you and the nearby ally with the lowest amount of health, 120 bonus health and 90 movement speed for 4 seconds, 20 seconds cooldown. So obviously, if it's only you and one ally, you always give him the movement speed. And a bunch of HP. So this is interesting because you could say that it's good in order to kite. Yeah, think about it. Somebody jumps on an AD carry, like a bruiser, let's say Darius, okay? Let's say Darius is trying to kill your AD carry. You're gonna give your AD carry 90 movement speed for 4 seconds, which is a lot, and some HP. So he's gonna be able to kite the Darius much better. 90 movement speed, if you think about it in percentages, because that just looks more visual. If I tell you something is 20% movement speed, you kind of get, well, it's 20% movement speed, that's kind of a lot of movement speed. But if I tell you it's, you know, 70 or 80 movement speed, which is around the same value, you're like, wait, what the fuck is 70 movement speed? So yeah, 90 movement speed is about 25% on average. And that is a lot of movement speed for 4 seconds. It's almost a mini ghost, or like an early game ghost for 4 seconds. Which is definitely going to be quite annoying when it comes to getting kited. But on the other hand, you can also use it to engage. And it's slowing or immobilizing an enemy grants you. So if you waste it like a noob, let's say you're throwing a random poke ability, you're probably not going to buy this on Morgana, but maybe you can in some cases. But let's say you play Morgana support, you throw your Q in order to poke someone, then you just waste Solstice Slay. So you have to be a little mindful of how you use this thingy. Anyway, Bloodsong, passive Spellblade, so it's Shin. After using an ability, your next attack is enhanced with an additional 150 base AD damage. It's a pretty high number. If the target is a champion, apply Exposed Weakness, increasing the damage they take by 12% melee, 8% range for 6 seconds. So anyways, 12% and the damage it does is quite high. Even for a ranged character, if you are a champion that abuses this to some extent, like I could see Ezreal support using this item, because you just throw Qs randomly, they did a lot of base AD damage, even though his base AD is pretty mediocre, but you deal an 8% increased damage. Maybe not Ezreal support, but I can definitely see this both on a lot of characters. Like think about Leona, she has a very low cooldown Q to proc this effect. And if you play against some, you know, tanks, bruisers, those kind of champions, it's definitely gonna make sense. You're gonna take 12% more damage as a tank. That's a lot on top of the... I'm just taking a bit of extra base AD damage. I can definitely see this on Leona, even Nautilus. You max E, it's pretty low cooldown. Just passive auto take someone. We'll see what happens. Dreammaker, you don't have to bother too much trying to understand this text. It's essentially 80. It's a different version of 80. Purple Dream Bubble, Blue Dream Bubble, Space Bubble, Summer, and you are... You guys might know what I'm talking about. Healing and shielding an ally blows both Dream Bubbles to them and empowers them for 3 seconds. Blue Bubble reduces incoming damage on the next hit, and Purple Bubble grants 90 bonus magic damage on the next hit. Whatever. It's an enchanter type of thing. Passive. Avoid explosion. Equal ability damage to a champion causes displeasure to a current location and damage to the target enemies, dealing 50 plus 3 maximum health magic damage, kept turn against monsters. 9 to 6 second cooldown based on level. So this is simply for Zyra, Brand, Zera, and all of those mage supports that want to deal extra damage. You can even... I don't know. Yeah, it's decent. It does a decent amount of damage. It doesn't really scale with anything except maximum health of enemies. I mean, no AP ratio. You know, I guess on those kind of champions you'll be locked to taking this every single game for the most part. The only thing that I could see being taken on some mage supports, such as, you know, Zyra, whatever, is Solstice Slay. Because of the healing and movement speed. That's the only alternative to this one for mages. But it would still be terrible. I'll probably never do it. I'm just theory crafting a bit here. So anyways, you have 5 options. A lot of champions will definitely be able to run multiple of them, which is very nice. A lot of champions will be able to run 2. Especially like the tank supports. Like definitely, for example, Leona can run all 3 of these. Enchanter items. Here's the glowing mote that I was talking about. I don't know why it's listed under enchanter items when it's probably built into a lot more items that aren't enchanter items. But I really don't like glowing mote. I think that this item should either have a lot more ability haste and be expensive, or be cheaper, or have a weird number of ability haste, because this is not the value that you would think 5 ability haste is. It just doesn't even make sense. 10 ability haste, in my eyes, if you compare items and you look at, for example, Kindle, Gem, and Fiendish Codex and stuff like that, 10 ability haste is around 300 gold. So having 250 gold for 5 ability haste is a bit of a scam. But I understand that if this item was 300 gold giving you 10 ability haste, then you could just stack glowing motes in your inventory and have like some meme builds with 4 or 5 glowing motes, getting some crazy ability haste in early game, and that could potentially be a little game breaking for a few champions for the memes. I don't know, Zillion, for example. Who knows even. But I wish glowing mote was actually an item that you could be like, hey, maybe I want ability haste on this base instead of a longsword. Though it's not going to be the case, glowing mote is never going to be better than a longsword, a ruby crystal, or an ampton. And keep in mind this glowing mote builds into brutalizer, Caulfield Warhammer, Fiendish Codex. Was it also? Yeah, of course, Kindle Gem. because why not? And all of those items. But it's always the worst component. You're only building glowing mode when you have leftover gold as you're building towards those other items, which is a bit sad. Maybe they didn't find a good way to balance it. I would at least make it 200 gold. I think that would be a bit more appropriate. Or have an odd number like 6 or 7 ability haste. Then glowing mode would actually start making sense without getting to that thingy I said where you could just stack your inventory with glowing modes. Do a little meme. Dawn Core. This is a very weird item that I think will just be pretty useless. So it's really expensive for a support item. Bannerglass Mirror plus Bannerglass Mirror. 40 AP, 20 ability haste, and 150 mana regeneration. Passive Dawn Core. Gain 3 heal and shield power and 5 ability power for 100 base mana regeneration. Now, what does that mean? You're not getting anything if you have like 50% or 75%. You have to always get the 100 base mana regen breakpoint, so 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. That looks a little silly. And then you get essentially a version of Cosmic Insight, 18 Summoner Spell Haste. So this is a Deathcap for enchanters. I just don't think it's that great. For sure, if you get to late game, you might want to build Dawn Core. And I think supports have a bit more gold income now. Because these items have more gold regeneration. You have 5 gold per 10 seconds. They have more gold regeneration. And another thing that I should probably mention is that this item gives a very low amount of stats, right? If you look at it, it's a pretty low amount of stats compared to, let's say, 40 ability power on Frostfang, right? So when you're looking at these items, you have to think, well, sure, you get this fancy passive, but is it this actually better than 40 ability power? And the answer will be no. So supports lost a lot of stats, but they gained some interesting effects, which you should consider that these aren't straight up buffs. If Zazak Realm Spike does less damage than 40 ability power, then you got nerfed. Let's keep moving forward. This item is gonna be weird. Nevertheless, Summoner Spell Haste is also a little bonus, and just like Deathcap, it builds out of 2 Bannerglass Mirrors. Just like Deathcap is out of 2 large ones. Interesting. Echoes of Elia has more AP, more haste, lost the passive that gave you some AP based on like region and stuff. And now it has 3 charges instead of 2 charges. And they restore 20 health and 55 magic damage. Huh. Interesting. They removed Chalice of Harmony after barely bringing it back, and it was kind of a nostalgic item. Also Putrefier, because now Morello does the same job. 2-in-1 deal, basically. I mean, Echoes of Elia, it's kind of like Athena Holy Grail. It's gonna be good in some cases on enchanters, not a big deal really. Staff of Flowing Water is more expensive, but it gives movement speed instead of ability list. Definitely gonna creep even more mobility into the game. We'll see what happens with that. Ardent Sensor has more movement speed, more EP, more regen, and more damage. Oh, it's just buffed Ardent Sensor. Sure, it's pretty garbage item. Doran's Blade has 3.5 lifesteal instead of 2.5 Omnivamp. That is a massive buff for early game sustain. They simply wanted to remove Omnivamp from every item except for Riftmaker, which you don't get by itself, you have to stack it over 5 seconds. I guess I don't mind that. They changed Doran's Ring to restore 1 mana per second, increase to 1.5 to just being 1.25 at all points. Sure, they just made it cleaner. I like that. We are finally done with items, my friends, and we are getting to runes. They removed Perfect Stopwatch, and instead we have Triple Tonic. At level 3, gain an Elixir of Avarice. Elixir of Avarice, on use, gain 5 true damage on hit against minions for 60 seconds. At the end of this effect, gain 40 gold. This is important especially for junglers, because they might reach certain breakpoints after their first clear in which they can buy a certain item. At level 6, gain an Elixir of Force. On use, gain 20 Adaptive Force for 60 seconds, which should equal 12 AD and 20 ability power, of course. At level 9, gain an Elixir of Skill. And by the way, we gotta mention that this aligns with your ult, so it comes at a good timer. Also aligns with objectives, the early game ones. Elixir of Skill. On use, gain a skill point. It does not grant a level or modify the rules around adding skill points into abilities. So you don't get extra stats, and you can't level, let's say, sooner. So normally you could be able to level your 5th skill point to level 9. If you're level 8, you're not going to be able to get your 5th skill point. You have to level one of your other abilities to rank 3. But yeah, this is niche, and what I like the most is that now you have a different option other than magical footwear if you really care about cosmic insight or approach velocity. Strangely, they didn't do anything about Time Warp Tonic, which is literally remove the rune from the game. Alright. I could see this being taken if you want to buy boots early, if you don't want to go into magical footwear, but you really want cosmic insight or approach velocity, and your champion can benefit from these things to some extent. Ironically, Woody has really nice value from having an extra skill point and boots early and approach velocity, so I might look into playing around with Triple Tonic a bit. Tower adjustments. So towers became tankier, Nexus became tankier, and that makes up a bit for the Void Grubs, which are going to give you extra damage to turrets. If you read this description, that's about it, really. We have some fist bumps, some dynamic music, and some in-game quests. I don't care about, okay. I think we shouldn't make this longer. It's over 3 hours. If you made it all the way, you're just a true warrior. I would do like some kind of recap, but we pretty much went into detail about everything. Hope you guys are gonna enjoy this video. I poured my brain into it. Hope I delivered the information as well as I can. If I have enough time, I'll look to make a timestamp. It's gonna be a little difficult. I would love if you guys could help me with a timestamp in the commentaries, because no way I'm gonna do it as I'll be posting this video, because it's 1 AM. Hopefully I can get this video out and play some Season 14 myself on the live server, maybe open up the stream a bit. But hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and look forward for a lot more in Season 14 when it comes to this type of content. Yeah, Alcadeters, no, let's just say that. Let's bring it back. Peace, my friends. I wish you a lovely season of League of Legends. See you on the Rift. Bye bye.